Ephraim's Chance. Written by Samantha Price. Narrated by Susanna Coleman. Chapter 1. And the Lord God said, It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him an helpmeet for him. Genesis 2:18. Ephraim, what are you doing running around with a woman like that? His mother's shrill voice rang through Ephraim Zook's ears before he entered the kitchen. He had been working hard all day, and the last thing he wanted to hear was more of his mother's complaints. Besides, he was not running around with anyone. He did not want to even think what his mother was concerned about this time. The only thing Ephraim knew for sure and for certain was that he could never do anything right in his mother's eyes. It was usually, "Why can't you be more like your older brothers?" Or, "Your dad would have never done it like that." At other times, she would complain that he was eating too much or not eating enough. Ephraim knew that his mom meant well and wanted the best for him, but he also knew that she was dominating. He finished taking off his dirty work boots and headed to the kitchen to speak to his mom. "A woman like what, Mom?" He knew as soon as the words left his mouth that he should have said, "I'm not running around with any woman." Ephraim's mother, Mary Zook, tended to the shoofly pies that she had just taken out of the oven. She wiped some flour off her full, ruddy cheeks with the back of her hand. "You know very well who I am talking about." His mother fired a steely gaze up at him from her piercing blue eyes. "Liz Coons, that's who." Ephraim dreaded what he knew was going to be an uncomfortable conversation. Yes, he liked Liz, and would be only too happy if she returned his affection. However, he knew that Liz Coons would not be the ideal choice for any Amish mother to have as a daughter-in-law. Liz had been brought up Amish, but left to live the English lifestyle as soon as she became old enough. "I'm a grown man. I'm quite capable of making my own decisions," he said. Ephraim broke off a piece of pie before his mother hit him over the knuckles with a spatula. "She's not like us, and you've got sisters who look up to you. Do you want them to start dressing all la-da-da? English like Liz with paint all over their faces?" Ephraim gave his mom an exaggerated, quizzical look. He knew what she meant, but he wasn't going to let his mom off lightly, not if she was talking ill of the woman he had grown very fond of. Liz was a flamboyant dresser and wore a lot of makeup, but he knew that Liz was a very good person. Ephraim crossed his arms in front of his well-muscled chest, leaned against the wall, and steeled himself for a barrage of complaints from his mother. Mary Zook stood with her feet planted squarely on the ground and her hands firmly planted on her wide, square hips. "You know very well what I mean. Look how she dresses. She's not even Amish." Ephraim had always done as his mother suggested and had never gone against her wishes. But this time things were different. He was different. "Mother, that is 2 complaints in the one sentence. I will take them one by one. Number 1, she dresses to suit herself, I imagine. Number 2, she was born Amish, so she might come back." Ephraim's mother picked up the nearest kitchen implement, which was a wooden spoon, and shook it at him with one hand, while her other hand was still firmly planted on her hip. "Ephraim Zook, you may be bigger than me, but I'm still your mother. Don't take that sassy English attitude with me." She lowered her voice and said, "She dresses trashy." Ephraim knew his mother lowered her voice to not be overheard by his sisters. "Trashy?" he asked, repeating his mother's word. His mother threw down the wooden spoon and dusted her hands off on her apron. "There's no other word for it," she said. Ephraim knew there was no use arguing with her when she was in one of these moods. He shook his head and walked out of the kitchen, giving her temper time to cool down. Frustration drew him back to try and defuse the situation, as he feared that his mother might never let the subject of Liz Coons alone. "I'm not interested in Liz in that way, okay?" he said before continuing. "She's just helping me set up the new computer in the barn. She's coming here tomorrow to show me how to use it." It occurred to Ephraim that it was very bad timing for Liz to be coming there the very next day after this awkward conversation. "Please be nice to her," he said firmly. "Ah, you want me to be nice to her? She's just a friend, is she?" His mother raised her eyebrows, avoided eye contact with Ephraim, and poked at her pies. Ephraim raised his voice. "Mom, did you hear me?" he demanded to know. "I heard you. You want me to be nice to her." Ephraim's frustration with his mother was growing. He placed his hands on his hips, stood in front of her, and looked down at her. "You will be nice to her then?" he asked again. "If she's nice to me, I might be nice to her." She broke off a little piece of pie and popped it in her mouth. "We'll see." Ephraim gave up trying to get the answer he wanted from his mother. He let out a loud sigh of frustration, shrugged his shoulders, turned, and did the only thing he could do: walk away. "Funny that she knows how to use computers," his mother muttered in a low voice. Ephraim caught her words as he walked away and turned on his heel. "What do you mean by that, Mom?" he asked. "Well, it's just funny, isn't it, that she knows about computers?" "That's her job, she works with computers," he replied. "Ah, see, that's my point, Ephraim. She's not like us. If she were Amish, she'd likely be married by now with children. Instead, she's doing modern English things and dressing like well, not dressing Amish, that's for sure." Ephraim walked back over to his mom and put his hands on her shoulders and spoke quietly. "Now look, Mom, I'm not interested in Liz. I need this computer for my horse trading business. You do want me to be successful, don't you?" he asked. "Yeah, you're already successful," she replied as she reached up and touched one of Ephraim's hands, which was on her shoulder, and gave him a smile. Ephraim raised his eyebrows at his mom's clumsy attempt at praise. "Thank you. Now can we please have no more talk of Liz?" he asked. Ephraim loved his mom and always tried to obey her wishes, but at times found her a little trying on his patience. His mom smiled and remained silent. Ephraim suddenly realized his mom was alone in the kitchen, which was most unusual as his 3 sisters were usually helping prepare dinner by this time. "Where are the girls? Why aren't they helping you with dinner?" "Dinner is all done. I'm keeping it warm. I've just sent the girls out to make sure there are no weeds in the garden while the sun's still up. They are getting caught up on the morning chores. Now go and talk to your dad," she told him. Ephraim was pleased that the difficult conversation was over for now. He felt a little frustrated that his mom wanted to make all his decisions for him, including finding a wife. At his age, most men in the community were married with children, including his 3 older brothers. That made Ephraim and his dad the only men left in the house. Ephraim sat next to his dad, who had finished his work for the day a little earlier than Ephraim. He was proud of the fact that his dad, even in his mid-60s, could still work just as hard and as long as a young man could. Ephraim's dad looked up from his paper. "Don't mind your mom. You know she means well," his dad said as he handed him a section of the paper to read. "Thank you. You heard? Hard not to hear your mom when she gets her head set on something." Ephraim was pleased to rest a little while before dinner and scanned the section of the bulletin. He was always keen to keep up with the latest news in the community. "Yeah, I know," he replied. "She's got it in her head that you and Liz are running around," his father told him. Ephraim shook his head. "Well, we aren't, and I don't know why she even thinks that. Liz and I have known each other since before she left the community. We were pretty close with her family once, weren't we?" he asked. "Yeah, but the Coons keep very much to themselves now. I don't think they've ever gotten over their only daughter leaving the community. It really hurt them when she came back to stay at the Miller's house for a year, rather than stay with them." Ephraim nodded. "All I'm saying is, I know Liz fairly well, and I've always been friends with her, so I'm not going to stop now," he told his father. His dad turned his attention back to his paper. "You're a grown man. You do what you see fit. I'm not going to tell you what you should be doing." Ephraim could not deny that he'd always liked Liz, even though she was quite a bit younger than he. Now that they were both older, the 7 years between them did not seem quite so large a gap. Chapter 2. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust. Psalm 91, 2. Liz woke up with a start and realized it was Saturday. Today she was going to go to Ephraim's house and teach him to use his new computer. She stretched out her arms above her head, slowly like a cat, and yawned. Liz never put her alarm on of a weekend. She had early mornings every weekday, so on the weekends she slept in until she woke up by herself. Liz considered that not being jolted awake by an alarm clock was quite a luxury. She looked bleary-eyed at the digital clock next to her on the bedside table. It was 10 minutes past 10, and she was to be at Ephraim's place at 2 p.m. The butterflies in Liz's tummy were already fluttering at the thought of seeing Ephraim's handsome face and rugged masculine frame. She had liked him for a long time and knew that he liked her too. Liz stared up at the ceiling. What on earth would she have in her closet to wear to his house? Something plain, something very plain, in case his mother is there. Who am I kidding? Of course his mother will be there, especially if she knows that I'm coming. It was no secret that Ephraim's mother did not like her. She saw the way that his mother looked at the two of them when they were speaking to each other at Annie's wedding. No, she definitely doesn't like me at all. Liz guessed that it was the way in which she dressed that his mother objected to. There was only one thing for it. If she wanted to get closer to Ephraim, she would have to get the approval of his mother first. What could she do to win her over? Take her some baked goods? No, my cakes or cookies would be way below her standard since Ephraim's mother is such a good cook. I could take her some flowers. Yes, even though she's got a lovely garden, everyone loves flowers. Liz made up her mind to stop by the florist to pick up a lovely bunch of flowers to take to Ephraim's mother. Liz recalled the verses of scripture wall plaques that she used to embroider when she was younger. I know she would love one of those, but I don't have time enough to make one now. It takes weeks to make one. I think she liked me back when I was younger, but back then I was Amish and now I'm English. She most likely thinks I will lead Ephraim astray or something. Maybe take him away from God and lead him into the wicked English world. Liz pushed back the bed covers and staggered to the kitchen in search of some much-needed coffee. It had been 6 months since she had moved out of the Miller's house and into her own leased apartment. She missed the hustle and bustle of family life, and also missed the fact that there was always hot coffee ready when she shuffled, half asleep, down to the kitchen early in the mornings. Things were different now Liz lived alone. For one thing, she had to do everything herself, which included all the washing, all the cooking, and all the cleaning. Doing everything was made up for by the fact that in her apartment she had electricity and a television. Liz had always had a cell phone, and now she did not have to keep it in her car like when she was staying at the Millers. She had all the modern conveniences of English life. And now, she did not know how she did without them for over a year at the Millers. She would have liked to stay longer at the Millers. The bishop, however, had other ideas, and suggested to Mr. Miller that it was time that Liz moved on if she wasn't going to get baptized or go back to her own parents' house. Luckily, she had recently gotten a job, and was able to afford her wonderful apartment with her stainless steel kitchen, plush carpet, and the deep bath in the bathroom. Liz flicked the switch of her coffee machine to on, and slumped in her large armchair. She pushed her head back into the softness of the leather and placed her feet on the coffee table in front of her. Why are mornings so hard? I'll be all right once I get some coffee. Once her coffee mug was filled to the brim, Liz took it into the bedroom to drink, while she searched through her clothes. Shapeless, plain, and modest is the look I'm going for. At the back of her closet, she found a pale blue dress, which she considered perfect until she remembered only Amish married women or women getting married wore blue. This will have to do then. Liz put her hands on a plain white dress with a high neck that ended well below her knees. The sleeves were cut out to reveal bare shoulders, but Liz figured she could hide that with just a light cardigan. With clothes strewn all over her bed, Liz returned to her comfortable chair to finish the last of her coffee. This was the first time Liz had lived alone. She had gone straight from her parents' house to live with her boyfriend David. It was when David turned violent that she escaped to the Miller's house. Liz often wondered whether her life would have been different if she would have had siblings. Maybe she would not have had so much pressure from her parents to be perfect if they had been busy with other children. Not being able to have more children after Liz was born had upset her parents greatly. Liz never knew the exact complication that caused her mother not to be able to have more babies. All she knew was she would often hear her mother crying at night and her father comforting her. Sometimes she even crept to their door and tried to listen to what they were saying, but she never could understand their low, muffled tones. Growing up, Liz was the only one in the community with no brothers and sisters, so the Miller girls, Kate, Annie, and Sarah, became like her sisters. Leaving home as soon as possible had always been Liz's goal, as she never felt very close to her strict parents who always seemed distant and aloof. As soon as she met David, an Englisher, she saw her escape route. She moved in with him very shortly after their first meeting. It was when Liz was living with David that, on his insistence, she did some computer courses to enable herself to gain employment. She considered herself to have landed on her feet when she got her well-paying job and was able to afford the lease on her beautiful top-floor modern condo. Liz never considered that she would ever like living by herself. but she came to appreciate the peace and the quiet. The huge floor-to-ceiling windows in the living area made the whole condo light and airy, and Liz had something to look at while she sipped her coffee of a morning. The 2 bedrooms with their own bathrooms even gave Liz the chance to bring someone else into the apartment to help with the rent if she ever wanted to. Liz placed her coffee down and picked up a magazine to take her mind off the nerves that were making her tummy flutter. Why am I so nervous? He's just a man. A very good-looking man. But a man just the same, Liz thought. I wonder why he is never married. Liz guessed Ephraim to be around 30 years of age, which was very old for an unmarried Amish man, as they usually marry in their early 20s. He's so good-looking too. I bet a lot of women would want him for a husband. I know he's also a hard worker, which the Amish women like. Having grown up Amish, Liz knew exactly what the Amish women looked for in a husband. They wanted a hard-working man, who is also a good man toward God, strong in faith. Liz recalled seeing Ephraim at a Mexican restaurant with an English woman when she was with Kate about 18 months ago. Liz hadn't seen him for some years, and when she saw him there in the restaurant, she told Kate that he would be nearly worth going back to the Amish for. Liz smiled at her recollection. I wonder what he was doing there with that woman. I can't think of any other time I've seen him with a woman. I don't remember hearing him ever courting anyone either. Liz made a mental note to ask Kate if she knew if Ephraim ever courted anyone. At that moment, Liz recalled that Kate mentioned some time ago that Ephraim had taken her on a buggy ride. She never said much about it, only that it had ended badly. Liz never took too much notice about it at the time because she had her own issues with her English ex-boyfriend. Chapter 3. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Proverbs 3:5-6. Ephraim had spent the last half hour waiting in the barn for Liz to arrive. He did not want to wait in the house. In the house, he would have been surrounded by his sisters and mother, and he was more than sure that Liz would have been the topic of conversation. 5 minutes to 10. She'll be here soon. Ephraim started to pace up and down the barn. He'd always had a fondness for Liz, but when he had reconnected with her months ago, he felt a real connection to her. He hoped that she felt the same. At 2 p.m. on the dot, Liz's red car pulled up in front of the house. Ephraim hurried to meet her before she ran into any members of his family, especially his mother. Ephraim's eyes quickly flickered toward the house, and he could see his mother's short, heavy frame looking out the kitchen window. "Good afternoon, Liz," he said. As Liz got out of the car, Ephraim noticed that she had no makeup on, and her clothing was very, very plain. Liz giggled slightly. "Hello, Ephraim." "Thank you for coming to help, Liz. It's this way." He gestured toward the barn, hoping very hard that his mom would stay in the kitchen. Has Liz dressed like this because she's not interested in me and couldn't be bothered? Or maybe she really likes me a lot and is trying to be more Amish-like, so I might be more interested in her. Ephraim hoped it was the latter reason. "Ephraim, I brought some flowers for your mother," Liz said as she opened the back door of her car and took out a large bunch of colorful flowers. "Shall I take them to her before we start?" she asked. "Yes, very kind of you, Liz. Mom loves flowers," he replied. Ephraim did not know how to tell Liz that his mother did not like cut flowers in the house or any decoration for that matter. His mother had always said, "The garden is for flowers, not the house." Liz walked toward the house with flowers in hand. "I'll get the door for you," he said as he reached for the door handle at the same time his mom opened the door. "Hello, Liz. Nice to see you again." Liz had not seen Ephraim's mother for some years, yet she looked exactly the same. "Hello, Mrs. Zook. I brought you some flowers." Ephraim's mother took the flowers from Liz. "Thank you. They're nice. Did you grow them yourself?" she asked. Oh no, is she having a dig at me, or did she think I would grow flowers like these? They look like store-bought ones to me. "No, I live in an apartment," she replied. Liz decided to give Mrs. Zook the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it wasn't sarcasm. "Well, they're very nice. Would you like to come in for some coffee?" Liz glanced up at Ephraim, who shook his head. "No, Mom, we've got things to do and we'd better get started," he said. Ephraim figured that the less time his mother and Liz spent together, the better. "Here it is." Ephraim pointed to a large room in the barn where he had a phone and computer. "I hope I bought the right one," he said. Liz examined the computer. Yes, this will do nicely. So, did you get it connected to the internet? She asked. Yeah, I called the phone company and they set me up with the internet connection running through the phone line, he told her. Liz sat down in the chair in front of the desk. Have you turned it on yet and had a practice? Ephraim sat on the desk. No, I didn't want to break anything, so I thought it best to wait for you. Liz laughed. You can't break anything. I'll show you what to do, and when I'm not here, just have a practice. That's the best way to learn. Ephraim was a little frustrated. He did want to learn the computer, but he did not want Liz's visit to be just all about the computer. He wanted to learn a little bit more about her and what she was doing in the English community. After about an hour learning all about the computer, Ephraim could not take any more in. I think that's enough for today. I don't think I'll remember any more. Liz leaned back from the computer. Okay, well, I'd best be going. No, it's too soon. Ephraim wanted her to stay for as long as possible. Would you like to go for a walk? He asked. Liz glanced at her watch. Okay, that sounds nice. Ephraim wondered if Liz had somewhere else to be since she looked at her watch. It was Saturday. Maybe she had a date later that day with a boyfriend, perhaps? I like apartment living, but I really miss living on a farm. Liz looked at the large open fields, the blue sky overhead and the white fluffy clouds. The sounds of the birds and the animals are also things I miss now that I'm living in an apartment. Liz inhaled deeply. There's just something so grounding about being on a farm, she said. Ephraim never took his life for granted. He took time every day to appreciate everything he had. He deliberately sat down every day to appreciate the farm, the sky, the water, and the animals. I've never lived anywhere else, so I've nothing to compare it with. I'd sure never like to leave, though, he replied. They walked a few more steps, then Ephraim said, Come on, I've got something to show you. He quickened his pace and reached out for Liz's hand. Ephraim was pleased that Liz did not hesitate to place her hand inside his. He smiled as he considered her hand a perfect fit inside his. What is it? Liz asked. You'll see in a minute. Ephraim headed to some trees and started looking in the undergrowth. Here. He stood up and stretched out his hand to Liz. Oh, wild blueberries. I love them, she announced. Liz took the 3 blueberries from his hand and put them all in her mouth. What, none for me? He asked playfully. Liz covered her mouth and laughed. I'm sorry, I thought there were more. Ephraim continued looking in the undergrowth and found 2 more. Seems today there aren't many here. He handed the other 2 to Liz, who quickly popped them in her mouth. I won't say no, she said. Must be too early in the season for them. Mom used to make a lot of blueberry pies from the blueberries around here. When my brothers and I were younger, we used to come and pick them and take them back to her. Ephraim missed the company of his older brothers who were all married and had farms of their own. Did you know that blueberries have a lot of antioxidants in them? She asked. Ephraim shook his head. Wild blueberries contain more than the cultivated blueberries. I studied nutrition while I was looking for a job last year. I remember the antioxidant in blueberries is called anthocyanin, she told him. Wow, you're smart as well as beautiful. Ephraim noticed that Liz's cheeks turned a little pink at his words, and her lips turned slightly upwards at the corners. Ephraim sat down in the grass and Liz sat down next to him. Liz, can I ask you a question? Liz pushed some of her blonde strands of hair back behind her ears. Yes, of course, she replied. Ephraim picked up a long piece of straw and placed it into his mouth. Why did you leave the community? Liz turned her face up to the sky. I've always felt different. I've always felt that I don't belong here. She giggled a little. I often used to think I was adopted. Ephraim smiled and turned his face toward the sun. You're not adopted. Liz playfully smacked his leg. How do you know? She asked. Well, you know my mom's the midwife for everyone around these parts. Has been for the last 30 years. She's told me who the adopted ones are. There are only 2 of them, and neither of them are you. She delivered you and nearly every young person I know in the community, he replied. She must have been busy with 7 children of her own to look after, Liz said. Ephraim recalled the times his mother was gone. His brothers and he used to be quite a handful for anyone except their mother. Yeah, I remember as a child she used to be gone when I woke up in the mornings, off delivering a baby. Grandma was alive then and she helped when Mom was gone, he said. Ephraim and Liz smiled at each other. It was a quiet moment. and Ephraim thought he might kiss her at any moment. He kept talking because he did not want to risk rejection. Anyway, back to you. You didn't feel you belonged here? No. I think women have it hard in the community. Everything is so much hard work, she replied. Ephraim had always found that hard work was rewarding and fulfilling, and was not a burden at all. The men work very hard. Do you think that the men don't work as hard as the women? He asked. Liz looked at her palm and rubbed away a stain left from the blueberries. I guess it's hard work for everyone. Life just seems so much easier for me out of the community, she told him. Ephraim wondered if he might be able to persuade Liz to come back to the community, perhaps as his wife. Women work hard to help their family and their husband. Do you think they don't find it fulfilling? He asked. Liz was silent for a while. I never really thought of it that way. Ephraim couldn't help notice the way Liz's long blonde hair was gently blowing in the breeze. He also couldn't help notice the fullness of her lips as she softly spoke her words. Ephraim knew that if he was out here much longer, alone with Liz, that he might do or say something inappropriate. We best get back. I can't keep you to myself all day. Even though I'd like to, he thought. After Ephraim stood up and dusted himself off, he offered his hand to help Liz to her feet. As she put her hand into his once more, Ephraim wanted to hold on to her hand tightly and pull her into himself. Instead, he let her hand fall out of his once she was on her feet. Before you go, Liz, could you just run me through how to get the computer turned on and logged onto the internet one more time? Of course, she replied. Ephraim held onto her arm as he turned her in the direction of the barn. Liz turned her face toward the sky once more. It's such a beautiful day. I love the feel of the sun on my face. Ephraim noticed how the sun danced on Liz's face and highlighted the translucency of her skin and the brightness of her eyes. He almost wanted to plead with her not to wear makeup as it detracted from her natural beauty. Ephraim wanted to tell Liz how beautiful he thought she was. Beautiful inside and outside. But he managed to keep his thoughts and feelings to himself. He desperately wanted to hold her hand again, but could not since they would soon be in sight of the house. What would his mom think if she saw him holding Liz's hand? He would never hear the end of it if she had real evidence that he liked Liz. He was happy to deny his fondness of her, for the moment. As they practiced logging on to the internet, they both heard an unfamiliar female voice near the door of the barn. Ephraim! They both stood up and walked to the doorway of the little room within the barn to see whom the voice belonged to. It was Ruth Gruber, a spinster, who was well known to be desperately looking for a husband. Ah, Ephraim, I'm sorry, I thought you'd be alone. Your mother sent me in here with these cookies. Ephraim walked toward Ruth. He immediately knew it was his mother's plot to ruin his short time with Liz. Thank you, Ruth. Tell Mom thank you, too. He took the plate from her hands. Ruth, you remember Liz? He asked. Ephraim saw that both girls looked embarrassed. It was obvious that everyone in that barn knew that his mother was trying to set him up with Ruth. Yeah, hello, Liz. Liz nodded to Ruth. Ruth's face flushed a scarlet color, and she looked to the ground and said, I'll be going now. She walked quickly back to the house. Well, I should be going now too, Liz said. Ephraim knew from the flowers that Liz gave his mother that she was trying hard to please her. It must be so obvious to Liz now that my mother doesn't like her. I'm sorry about that, Liz, he said. There's nothing to be sorry for. Liz pushed past Ephraim and headed for the barn door. It's not your fault that your mother doesn't care for me, she replied. Ephraim's heart froze. He could not let her leave like this. At that moment, he did not care a toss if his mother saw the two of them touching each other. They were both in view of the house as he hurried toward Liz and grabbed her arm and turned her to face him. Liz, it's nothing to do with my mother. Who I like is nothing to do with my mom. Ephraim had put himself on the line and for the first time had given Liz a very large hint that he liked her. Liz looked up into his eyes. There's too much against us, Ephraim. I'm an Englisher now, and not only that, your mom hates me. She doesn't hate you. She doesn't even know you. He gazed into her vivid blue eyes. He wanted her to believe him, but even he did not believe a word of what he said. Ephraim closed the small distance between them and put his arm around the small of Liz's back. Liz put her hands lightly on his arms. Their bodies touched as they gazed into each other's eyes. Ephraim thought that he might steal a kiss before he heard his mother call out to him. There you are. Oh, are you still here, Liz? She asked. Ephraim quickly released his hold on Liz. Liz raced past Ephraim's mother. Ephraim shot his mother an angry look which said, "Keep out of this," before he ran after Liz. "Liz, wait," he said. He was too late. Liz had already started up her car and was driving away. Ephraim turned and walked back to his mother. "Why did you do that?" he demanded to know. "What? I just came out to see if my son had finished his cookies. Can't a mother worry about her son?" she replied. Ephraim lowered his voice. "And what do you mean by having Ruth over here? You know she's looking for a husband," he said, fury rising in his voice. "She's just a nice girl, and I haven't seen her for a while. I thought I'd invite her over," she told him. Ephraim put both hands up to his head. "Can you stop meddling?" he pleaded with his mother. His mother walked past him back to the house. "I don't know what you're talking about." Chapter 4. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. Psalm 121, 1. Liz was so upset that she could not hold back the tears that rushed down her face. She had grown fond of Ephraim, yet what future could they possibly have together? He had already been baptized, so if he left the community he would be shunned. She was certainly not prepared to return to the community and live the Amish lifestyle. What possible future was there for the two of them? Even if she did return to the community, it was clear that Ephraim's mother did not like her. Surely even Ephraim could see that. Liz had a few acquaintances in the English world, but no real friends. She had no real friends like her Amish friends, Kate, Annie, and Sarah, with whom she had grown up. The three of her friends were all happily married now, and Kate and Sarah even had babies. Liz had to wonder whether marriage was for her. Liz remembered the terrible time she had when the Englisher man she had once lived with turned violent toward her. She often wondered whether it was her fault. Was she so awful that she drove him to hit her? Liz decided to see whether Kate was at home. She could do with some cheering up. Liz parked her car outside Kate's house. Liz tried to see if anyone was home by peering through some of the windows before she got out of the car. As she had driven up, she had seen a couple dozen nappies drying in the wind, so she figured Kate wouldn't be too far away. Kate flung the door open. "Liz, I was hoping that was your car. Come in." Kate had her baby Hannah on one hip and was looking very satisfied with herself. "You look good, Kate. Hannah has gotten so big," Liz replied. "Yeah, she's growing into a big girl." Kate moved Hannah over to her other hip. "Annie's here as well," Kate told her. Liz was pleased that she would be able to speak to the two sisters, as she hadn't seen much of Annie since her wedding. "I'll put a pot of coffee on." Kate handed the baby to Liz as they moved through to the large kitchen area. Liz tried to hold Hannah a few different ways. "Oh my, I'm not sure how to hold her, Kate." Annie laughed. "Give her to me then." Liz passed the baby over to Annie, and the two girls sat down at the kitchen table while Kate fixed the coffee. "What have you been up to, Liz?" Annie asked as she bounced Hannah up and down on her lap. "I've just been to Ephraim's place to help him with his new computer," Liz replied. "Really? Ephraim?" Annie looked thoughtful. "I remember you telling me a while ago that you liked someone in the community. So was it Ephraim?" Liz ran her fingers along the grain of the wooden table in front of her. "Yes." "Hold on, you two, before you say another word. Wait until I get back there," Kate called out. Annie and Liz smiled at each other, as they knew Kate never liked to miss out on any of the latest news. Kate brought the pot of coffee to the table along with 3 large mugs. "Okay, speak now." Liz giggled. "I was just telling Annie that I was at Ephraim's house helping him with his computer." Annie and Kate looked at Liz as if they were waiting for her to tell them more. She did not tell them that he held her hand as they walked across the sun-drenched fields. She did not tell them of the electric current that seemed to pass between the two of them as he drew her slowly to her feet after he found blueberries for her. Liz had gone from one extreme to another in the space of 30 minutes. One moment she felt giddy with delight, and the next moment those feelings had turned to futility and hopelessness. Ephraim's mother had successfully ruined things for the two of them. "I think his mother hates me," Liz said. Kate poured the coffee into the 3 mugs. "No, she wouldn't hate you." Liz leaned in toward Kate to make her point. "She even had Ruth bring cookies to the barn, and Ruth was surprised that I was there. That can only mean one thing." "Ruth Gruber?" Annie asked. Liz nodded. Yes, his mother is trying to match him up with Ruth Gruber. Well, anyone but me. Kate took her baby from Annie's lap. I'll take her so you can drink your coffee. Thank you. Annie took a sip of her coffee. Sounds like Ephraim's mom is trying to match him up with Ruth, all right. Kate stood up and tried to settle her baby, who was starting to cry. Strange that she would do that while you were still there. That's what I mean. She hates me, Liz insisted. Annie cleared her throat. Well, if she does or she doesn't, don't be concerned. Unless you really, really like him. The two girls fixed their eyes on Liz, waiting for a response. I think I do. Liz stared into the dark, swirly liquid in her coffee mug. I don't mean to spread gossip, and I'm just saying this because you are like a sister to me. But have you heard the stories that surround him? Kate asked. Liz nodded her head. I've heard some stories. I don't know if there's more than what I've heard. Annie leaned forward. Just be careful, Liz. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about. Maybe he's changed. The stories are old now, and he's been baptized since then, Kate added. Before I heard the stories, I thought he'd make a fine husband. Annie sat back in her chair. Yeah, I'm sure there's nothing to be worried about as long as you're careful. Liz thought it ironic that she had recently had a bad experience with an Englishman, and now she was being warned about an Amish man. Was it just her? Or were bad men suddenly everywhere? Or was it just she who was attracting bad men? Kate and her two sisters, Annie and Sarah, were all married to wonderful men, so why couldn't she have the same? You know what your problem is, Liz? Annie asked. Liz turned to Annie. What? You like the bad boys. Maybe Annie is right, Liz thought. Do you think so? Well, look at David. You knew he was a bit of a bad boy before you got involved with him. Yes, and look how that turned out, Kate said, agreeing with Annie. Liz realized that she was attracted to men who did not conform to what was considered normal. I guess I do find so-called bad boys more interesting. If you want to find a husband, don't go for your usual type, Kate said. That's right, Annie added. You need someone caring, and someone who will work hard to provide for you. I guess that makes sense. One thing Liz knew was that she did not want to end up with another man like David. He was overly nice to her to begin with, and then, after a few months, he acted just the opposite. Liz drove back to her apartment with her friend's words very much on her mind. She would try and find a nice man who treated her properly, and not put herself at risk with a man who had a bad reputation. As Liz pulled up to her apartment, she saw Ephraim sitting on the front step of the building. Chapter 5. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. Psalm 55:22. Ephraim, how long have you been here? Liz asked. Ephraim rose to his feet. I came here after you rushed off in such a hurry, he replied. Liz's heart thumped hard. Her thoughts turned to what Annie and Kate had said about not going for her usual type of man. She was lost for words. She did not want to invite him up to her apartment, as she would normally do if she saw a friend waiting for her. The silence between the two of them was awkward. Come up to the apartment, I'll fix you some coffee, Liz finally said. No, it wouldn't be right. Can we just walk for a bit? He asked. As they walked up the street, Liz just knew that Ephraim had come there to tell her something. This might seem a bit strange to say to you now, but I don't know the proper way or the proper time to say it, he said. Ephraim turned to face her. I like you very much, Liz, he told her. Liz did not know how to respond. If he had said this a few hours ago, she would have responded that she liked him too. Now it had been confirmed by Kate and Annie that there were stories out there about him, and rumors. Was she going to make another big mistake like she had when she had gotten involved with David? She liked him too, but not if all the stories about him were true. I will not let myself fall in love with another unsuitable man, she thought. For her next relationship, Liz wanted to choose with her head, not her heart. Her heart had chosen David, and that had been a complete disaster. Ephraim added, I'm sorry about what happened today with my mom and everything. Liz was still silent while she searched for words, but none came. After a few tense, silent moments, Ephraim said, Well, that's all I came to say. He turned and walked toward the apartment, and Liz caught up with him. When they reached the apartment building, Ephraim said, Tell me, Liz, will you have dinner with me tonight? He quickly added, At a restaurant, of course, not at my house. Liz was pleased that he was not discouraged by her silence, yet she was still a little reluctant to get too close to him. Liz already had plans to meet the people from her work for drinks. Damien, her co-worker, had just received a promotion and everyone at Liz's work was going out to celebrate. Liz thought that with all the other people there it would be perfect to invite Ephraim. At least this way I won't have to be alone with him. I'm meeting some friends tonight for drinks. You could come too if you'd like, she said. Ephraim smiled and Liz felt her heart flutter in spite of the warnings in her head. He was so handsome, and even more so when he smiled. Surely the stories about him could not be true. Liz felt so safe and protected when Ephraim was around. She was sure that he was a man who would look after her, a man she could put her trust in. Ephraim walked into the bar pleased to have Liz on his arm. He was always happy when she was with him. She was modestly dressed in a beige knitted dress that stopped at her knees. The heels on her shoes were high, as usual. Ephraim had been to bars before, but they weren't places he liked. The music was not only pumping through his head, it was vibrating, uncomfortably through his whole body. "Over here," she said. Liz tugged on his arm as she waved in the direction of a group of men gathered around a table. As they made their way through the crowd, Ephraim's eyes were drawn to the bright lights over the bar, where the bartenders flamboyantly shook metal cocktail shakers and were throwing things up in the air. As they sat down, Liz introduced the 5 men to Ephraim. Ephraim noticed that they were all wearing suits. "Hey dude, what's your name?" Ephraim looked over his shoulder to see who was calling him dude. He had never been referred to as dude before and he did not like it. It was a 6th man who was bringing drinks back to the table. The man's hair was shaven very close to his head. His shirt was white with long sleeves that had been pushed up to his elbows, and he had a thin blue tie which was loosely knotted. "My name is Ephraim, and you are?" he asked. "I'm Damien." Damien put the drinks down on the table. The man sitting opposite Ephraim had just swallowed the last mouthful in his glass and placed it rather too heavily back on the table. Ephraim was surprised that the glass was still in one piece. "Hey, Ephraim, nice suspenders," the man said sarcastically. Damien and most of the other men doubled over laughing while their glasses of beer shook in their hands. Liz's eyes turned to the ceiling and she shook her head. One man, who did not laugh, looked at Liz and then Ephraim. "What are you two drinking?" Liz spoke before Ephraim had a chance. "We'll just have soda, thanks, Bob." When Bob left to get drinks, Liz whispered to Ephraim that he was the boss. Damien laughed and said to Ephraim, "Soda, that's a girl's drink." All the men at the table laughed again. Ephraim was used to Englishers pointing at him and whispering things, but he had never experienced rude people like this up close. Liz turned to Ephraim. "Let's go." Ephraim spoke in a low voice so only Liz could hear. "We'll go after just one drink. It would be rude to go before your boss gets back," he said. "No, don't go yet. This party is just getting started." Damien turned to the man next to him and said, "Maybe he has to go home and milk the cows." The men roared, laughing at Damien's joke. "I don't have any cows, Damien. I have horses, chickens, dogs, and 1 cat. But I don't have any cows," he replied. Liz groaned and put her head in her hands. Ephraim knew that this was a bad start to having any sort of relationship with Liz. When Bob came back with their drinks, Liz made their apologies and left. As they walked out, they could hear Damien and one of the other men at the table laughing loudly. Once they were outside, Liz said, "I'm really sorry. I never thought they would be like that. They just get silly when they're drunk," she said. "No harm done. I'm not easily offended. Besides, the suspenders are quite nice. I think that they were envious," he replied. Liz laughed. They walked in silence for a few more steps before Ephraim said, "Liz, do you think you really belong in this world?" Liz pushed her hair away from her face. "Yes, I'm quite happy," she replied. Ephraim wondered if that were true. Surely she couldn't be happy in a world where people feel free to insult each other and laugh at people. "Would you like to see me again?" he asked. Liz looked up at him for a moment and then nodded. "I've seen a little bit of your world, so now it's time you see a little bit of mine." Liz giggled a little. "What were you thinking? I'm not going to do any farming or anything like that or clean any manure out of stables." "I was thinking you could come to the horse auctions with me this Saturday." Liz opened her mouth as if she was going to say something and then hesitated. Please say you'll come. They're only on the last Saturday of every month, so if you miss this one, you'll have to wait another whole month. He hoped she would come with him so he could spend more time with her. Liz screwed up her nose. I don't have to do anything with them, though, do I? I'm a little scared of horses. He replied, You don't have to do a thing. I've got 2 that I'm selling through the sales, but I won't make you do anything. Good. It was an awkward moment when they stood at the entrance to Liz's apartment. Should he lean forward and give her a kiss on the cheek? Shaking her hand would be far too formal. Instead, he backed away and gave a little wave. See you on Saturday, then, he said. See you on Saturday, she replied. Chapter 6. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusted in him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart greatly rejoiceth, and with my song will I praise him. Psalm 28:7. Liz could not wait to get upstairs into the safe haven of her apartment. She unlocked her door, threw her keys on the kitchen bench, and slumped into one of her 2 huge armchairs. It was clear to Liz that Ephraim was totally uncomfortable with her way of life, and she knew for a fact that he would never leave the Amish. He had even gotten baptized into the Amish, so he was pretty solidly entrenched into everything that the Amish lifestyle entailed. Liz closed her eyes and imagined what her world would look like if she returned to the Amish and married Ephraim. First of all, she would not be wearing makeup. She would not be able to bleach her hair, so it would return to its natural dark blonde instead of her preferred platinum blonde. She would have to wear plain clothing the same as the other Amish women, and a prayer cap all the time. Liz pushed those irritations aside and focused on thoughts of married life with Ephraim. Through the day, there would be cooking, washing, and cleaning. Ephraim would come home at night, and they would have dinner together. Then they would sit down to talk and read after dinner. Liz remembered her mother always said, There is great satisfaction to be had through the creation of a good meal. Growing up, Liz had preferred embroidery to cooking, as the embroidery lasted forever, whereas the meal disappeared quickly. However, the thought of eating a meal that she had prepared with Ephraim was a thought that pleased her. Is God using Ephraim to lure me back into the community, almost like bait? Liz did not think she would ever feel the same way about any other man as she felt about Ephraim. There was something about his largeness and manliness. Ephraim had towered above the men she worked with, in height and in muscle. Ephraim could have crushed those 2 idiots I work with. Yet he kept calm and walked away. Liz admired his strength of character for being able to walk away from insults without getting into a fight. David would have torn the whole bar apart to get to any man who insulted him. Liz was suddenly looking forward to Saturday. It was very late at night, and Ephraim was the only one in the household still awake. He sat on the porch and rocked in the rocking chair. Would Liz ever be willing to come back to the community? She agreed to see me again, so surely she must be considering it. Even in a small way, Ephraim thought. Ephraim had told Liz he had been baptized, so surely she would know that he would not leave the community now. Would she ever wear plain clothes again? She just seemed so English now. Ephraim recalled the dreadful experience Liz had with his mother when she was helping him with the computer. I hope it doesn't make it harder for Liz thinking that my mom doesn't like her. It certainly wouldn't help the situation. Ephraim was still angry with his mother for trying to push Ruth, the spinster, onto him. Not only did his mother do that, but also she did it in front of Liz. Here you are. Ephraim turned around to see his mom. Hope I didn't wake you, he said. No, I was just worried when you didn't come home for dinner. Ephraim's mom sat in the chair next to him. I asked Lydia to tell you I wouldn't be home. Didn't she tell you? He asked. Lydia was Ephraim's oldest sister. Ephraim's mom laughed. That girl wouldn't remember where she put her head if it wasn't screwed on. So where were you? Ephraim was annoyed by his mother's constant prying. He was a grown man, after all. It was none of his mom's business where he had been. Still, he was taught to be respectful of his elders. Just had some things to get finished, he told his mother. Those things include Liz? She asked. He shook his head. Mom! Don't go getting your heart broken. She's not Amish anymore. She made that decision a long time ago. I heard she even lived with a man, his mother replied. Ephraim wished his mom had not heard that piece of information. That's none of my business and none of your business, he snapped at his mother. If you are fond of her, then it is your business, she replied. His mother stared at him. Neither of them spoke for a while. Ephraim hoped that his silence would stop his mother from speaking of Liz. Some men would consider her to be damaged goods, his mother said. Ephraim looked across to his mother. Mom, that is a terrible thing to say. I'm not saying it. I said that some men would think that. I didn't say that I thought that, she replied. Ephraim's mom looked innocently at him through wide eyes. Ephraim looked straight across the farm and let out a huge breath of air, almost a sigh. There was really no use speaking to his mother. She had an excuse for everything. I like Liz. Can you try and like her, please, for my sake? He asked. I can see why you like her. She's fancy and showy, but it's all froth and bubbles. No substance, she replied. You don't even know her. You haven't spent any time with her since she was a child, so you don't know what she's like, he said. I know her kind. Don't you want someone like you, someone like us? She's not like us. It's very important that we keep away from the outside world. You know that as well as me, she replied. Ephraim stood up. He could not hear any more of what she was saying. I'll be home later. I'm going for a walk. His mother quickly rose to her feet and called after him. It's dark. What time will you be back? Ephraim turned toward his mom and walked backwards. I don't know what time I will be back. I'm a grown man. Just go to bed. As Ephraim paced briskly down the driveway toward the road, he could not shake his mother's words. The night was dark and still, and the leafless trees hung eerily over his head. Ephraim kicked some stones that lay in his way. In a way, his mother was right. Liz was English, and he could already feel his attraction for her strengthening with every moment they spent together. What if she did draw him away from God, the community, and from his family? He was sure Liz returned his affections. But she'd already been with a man, and if they did get married, then he would not be her first. Ephraim cast his mind back to all the things Liz had spoken to him about to see if he could find any hint that she would be willing to return to the Amish. He could not recall any. He could recall her saying that she loved the English world and everything about it. Nothing even positive was said of the Amish way of life. Ephraim knew he had some tough decisions to make. Should he continue seeing Liz and risk losing all that made him who he was? He knew it was something that was either black or white, and there were no compromises to be had. If they loved each other, they would either have to live in the Amish world or the English world and nothing in between. The trouble was, Ephraim was not willing to live in the English world, and he knew that Liz would not come back to the Amish community. Ephraim turned and headed back to the house. The long walk had cleared his mind. It had nothing to do with what his mother had said to him, although she was the voice of reason. There was only one thing he could do. God was the top priority in his life, and he did not want to take the risk that Liz and her worldly ways may pull him away. Ephraim knew he had to stop seeing Liz, or both of them would get hurt. She was to be at the horse auction with him on Saturday, but after that, he would not ask her anywhere again. Hopefully that will be the end of it, he thought. Chapter 7. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him I will trust. Psalm 91, 1. Ephraim's eyes washed over Liz from head to toe. I'm pleased that you've exchanged your high heels for something more sensible, he said as he studied Liz's boots. They definitely were not riding boots or boots to do with hiking. Though the heel was low, her boots appeared to be made out of the finest leather. Thank you. This is the first time I've worn these, she replied. Liz lifted up her foot to show off her boots. Now come and see the first horse I'm selling today, he said. Ephraim guided Liz through the crowds to where the horses were tied up waiting for their turn to be auctioned. Ephraim stopped in front of a dark bay horse with a white star on his forehead. He looks, nice. Liz stood at a distance. Ephraim patted the horse on his neck. He is nice. He's a good-looking horse, and I'm hoping to get quite a bit of money for him, he told her. Liz looked the horse up and down. You can lead him out if you like, he said. A fearful expression covered Liz's face as she looked up at the huge horse. No, Ephraim, I'm frightened of horses, she replied. Ephraim laughed. Nonsense, there's nothing to it. Besides, this one is as quiet as a lamb. He clicked the lead on the horse's halter and opened the pen. See, this is all you do. Liz jumped back out of the way while Ephraim walked the horse up and down the walkway while loosely holding on to the lead. The horse followed along, as quiet as a mouse. As he walked back toward Liz, she said, "I guess I can handle that, if you're sure he's quiet." Ephraim patted the horse firmly on the neck as he replied, "Yeah, he's a quiet boy. You can just lead him a little way to get used to it. Someone else will actually lead him out to the ring." Liz looked startled. "You want me to lead him all the way to the ring?" she asked. "It's just a short way. I'll be standing right next to you," he told her. Liz took a deep breath and tied her hair behind her head. "I will give it a try," she replied. Ephraim was pleased to see that Liz trusted him and was trying to get over her fear of horses. "Pat him," he said. "Where?" she asked. Ephraim picked up her hand and placed it on the horse's neck. "Just here on the neck. That's where he likes it," he told her. Liz patted the horse on the neck but jumped away shortly after when the horse turned his head toward her. "Here, touch his nose. He's gentle." Ephraim stepped aside so Liz could touch the horse on the nose. "Oh, his nose is lovely and soft," she said. Ephraim laughed. "Okay, let's go," he announced. Liz jumped back. "What now?" Ephraim offered the lead to Liz. "Stay next to me and be ready to take the lead. Relax. Don't be tense. Horses pick up on tension," he said. Liz took the lead in her hand and walked toward the door of the enclosure, into the narrow waiting bay, ready to be let out. The horse was walking quietly beside her when suddenly someone in the crowd near the fence opened a can of soda and it hissed. The horse reared up sideways and then bucked a few times before bolting to the end of the enclosure. Ephraim was knocked to the ground and narrowly missed one of the horse's hooves connecting with his head. As soon as he realized what had happened, he saw Liz on the ground. "My leg!" she screamed. Liz held onto her leg while she lay on the hard, dusty ground. "Get the medicos!" Ephraim yelled to the official who had just managed to catch the horse. Ephraim could not see any help coming, so he quickly scooped Liz up and carried her to the on-site first aid van. The paramedic examined Liz's leg. "Looks like we'll need to get her to the hospital. It could be broken." "Let's do that then," Ephraim urged. "The ambulance is on its way, should be here any time." Ephraim looked at the pain on Liz's screwed-up face. "Liz, I'm so sorry. It was such a silly idea to have you lead the horse." Liz looked as though she was trying to hide the pain. "I'm fine, I'll be fine," she replied. Ephraim did not think that Liz looked fine at all. She looked as white as a sheet. Liz put her hand out for Ephraim to hold it. "Don't leave me." "I won't. I'll come with you to the hospital," he assured her. Before long, an ambulance arrived and took them both to the closest hospital. The hospital staff at the emergency room put Liz in a wheelchair, so she would not have to move. Liz looked around the sterile, bleak emergency waiting room. "I hate hospitals." "I got used to them," Ephraim said matter-of-factly. Liz jiggled her leg. "Ow, that hurts." "What do you mean you got used to hospitals?" she asked. "I've been to hospital quite a bit, but let's not talk about that now. We need to get you better first," he told her. A nurse who had been sitting behind her computer at the counter came up to them. "It won't be long now. We're just having a busy day being Saturday and all." Liz nodded. Ephraim was trying to do the best he could to keep Liz in good spirits. Another nurse with a folder in her hand stood on the other side of the room and called Liz's name. "Yes," Ephraim called out as he stood up to wheel Liz toward the nurse. The nurse led them down a narrow corridor and into a room where 2 nurses and a male attendant moved Liz onto a hospital bed. "The doctor won't be long now." The 2 nurses and the attendant left the room. A tall man with dark chocolate-brown hair walked into the room. He was holding the same folder that the nurse had been holding. "Liz Kunz?" Ephraim figured him to be the doctor because he was wearing a white coat and had a stethoscope slung about his neck. He also had an air about him that doctors sometimes have. "Yes, that's me," Liz said. Was Ephraim imagining it, or did Liz just light up when the good-looking doctor walked through the door? Ephraim studied the doctor's face and saw that he looked mighty happy when he saw Liz as well. The doctor turned to Ephraim. "And you are Mr. Kunz?" Ephraim felt like asking the doctor what that would matter to him, but instead he just shook his head. The doctor gestured toward the door. "Would you mind stepping out for a moment?" "I'd prefer to stay here," he said as he looked at Liz. "I'll be okay, Ephraim," Liz told him. "I won't be far away," he said. Ephraim waited back at the waiting room. He had been ready to distance himself from her, but now that she was injured, he realized exactly how much she had found his way into his heart. Had he come this far with Liz only to lose her to a doctor? It serves me right. How stupid was I to force Liz to lead that horse when she was scared and didn't even want to? It's my fault that she hurt her leg. Now she's probably going to marry a rich, handsome doctor, and that'll be my fault as well. A nurse stood in front of Ephraim and he looked up. "You can go back in now. She's asking for you," the nurse said. When Ephraim got back to the room, the doctor had gone and Liz was alone. "I've had x-rays taken and now I'm just waiting for the results. Can you wait with me or do you have to go?" she asked him. "No, of course I can wait," he replied. Ephraim had a lot of chores waiting for him back home. Hopefully his dad would see that he hadn't come home and would feed and water the horses for him. Everything else would just have to wait. The doctor came back around 2 hours later with some x-rays in his hand. The doctor nodded to Ephraim and seemed to be uncomfortable to speak in front of him. "It looks like quite a bad break." "Oh no," Liz said. The doctor continued. "Looks like it will need pinning." "Pinning? What's involved in that?" Ephraim asked as he patted her on the shoulder in an attempt to calm her down. "We'll have to operate and fix the bone fragments back into place." Ephraim noticed that Liz's face had turned white again as she turned to look at him. "Operate? There are fragments? That sounds bad," Liz said. The doctor held the x-rays up to the light to show them. A normal broken bone must be carefully fixed in position and supported until it is strong enough to bear weight. Often this can be done using just a cast, such as a plaster cast. What you have is called a proximal tibia fracture. So in that type of fracture, it's best to repair by what we call internal fixation. We have to go inside and hold the bone fragments together, after we reposition them with rods, plates, or sometimes screws. Liz held her stomach. "I think I'm going to be sick." "That's only natural," the doctor said as he pushed the x-rays back into an envelope. "I'll have the nurse give you something for the nausea." "I'm so sorry, Liz. This is all my fault." If only he had not talked her into leading the horse, then none of this would have happened. Ephraim turned his attention to the doctor. "How long will she be in hospital?" he asked. "At this stage, I'd say Miss Coons will be in here for 3 or 4 days. We won't know for sure until we see how well she responds to surgery." "What? That long?" Liz said. The doctor nodded. After the doctor left, Ephraim said, "Can you ever forgive me, Liz? It's all my fault." "Nonsense, you could never have known something like this would happen. It's just a freak accident," she replied. Liz's gracious response did nothing to stop Ephraim from feeling responsible for the accident. "Do you need anything, Liz? Do you want me to call anyone for you?" he asked. "No, not at the moment, thank you." Am I imagining it, or is the doctor sweet on Liz? Ephraim knew that he would have to leave her in the hospital, in the hands of the handsome doctor. He wanted to stay with her, and somehow make her feel better, but he could not. Chapter 8. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Psalm 37, 4-5. Liz was depressed at having to stay in the hospital, and even more depressed that she needed an operation. She wondered if she should call her parents, but such a rift had developed between them that she thought it was irreparable. Her doctor was trying to fit her in to have the operation the very next day as she was in quite a bit of pain. The small room was dark and she had no idea what time it was. She could only assume it was night. There was an unoccupied bed next to her and she was glad, at least, that she had a room to herself. Liz could hear very little sound coming from outside the room. Occasionally, she heard the nurses walking up and down, talking to one another. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air, which reminded her how she hated hospitals. The pain in Liz's leg was the most intense pain she had ever felt. The hospital had bound it tightly and given her pain relief, which dulled the pain to a degree. Even though she disliked the thought of an operation, she knew she would have to go through with it for her leg to heal properly. The doctor had told her she could have just a plaster cast if she really did not want the operation, but chances were that it would not work, and she would have to have the operation at some later stage. Liz replayed the incident over in her mind. It was as if it had all happened in slow motion. She recalled the horse rearing up and reefing the reins out of her hands. She had felt 2 strong hands on her waist pulling her down. Then came the intense pain as the horse landed all his weight on her bent leg and snapped it like a twig. The next thing she remembered were the loud shouts calling for an ambulance as Ephraim lifted her and carefully carried her out of the enclosure, and all the way to the first aid van. The pleasing sensations of being picked up effortlessly by strong, masculine arms played over in her mind. Even though she was experiencing intense pain, she found the experience of being so close to Ephraim very pleasing. He smelled all manly with just a hint of lavender soap. A crack of bright light drew Liz's eyes to the door. She was sure it was Ephraim's large silhouette that had entered her darkened room. "Ephraim?" she asked. He moved closer to her. "Liz, I wasn't sure you'd be awake," he replied. She tried to sit herself up slightly until it hurt her leg. "What time is it?" "Go back to sleep. It's 2 o'clock in the morning," he told her. She was pleased that he had come back. "What are you doing here? You need your sleep." Ephraim left the door open slightly, which let some light into the room. He picked up a chair from the other side of the room and placed it next to Liz's bed. "I just wanted to check that you were all right," he told her. "Thank you for coming. I'm all right. I'll be better when this operation is over. I'm not looking forward to it." "Have you been asleep at all, Liz?" he asked as he pushed some strands of hair back from her face and caressed her forehead. "Yes, I just woke up and was wondering what time it was." Ephraim sat down in the chair that he had placed by the bed. "You go back to sleep. I'll just sit here and have a doze in the chair," he told her. "I'm sorry about the horse auction. Did he end up getting sold?" she asked. Ephraim laughed quietly. "I got much more than I expected from him. It seems the bidders liked his lively spirit," he replied. "That's good. I'll have to collect my commission," she said. Ephraim shook his head. "No talking. Just go to sleep now." Ephraim leaned forward and stroked her arm. After a little silence, Liz said, "Ephraim, are you still awake?" Ephraim leaned forward. "Yes, I'm still awake," he replied. "I'm scared about the operation. Will you pray for me?" "Yeah, of course." In the dim lighting, he found Liz's hand and began. "Dear Lord, we both ask that you will look after Liz in this operation tomorrow. Please guide the doctor's hands and give him wisdom to do what is needed to make Liz healthy and whole once more. Amen." Liz felt comforted by his prayer and comforted by holding his warm, strong hand. Once he had finished praying, she hoped he would not let go of her hand. He did not. Liz woke up to bright sunlight streaming in through the hospital window. She immediately looked to the chair next to her and realized that Ephraim must have gone home at some stage through the night, or maybe very early that morning. "Knock, knock, breakfast time." A large lady in a blue uniform bustled her way through the door and placed a tray of food on the table beside her. A nurse came running in straight behind her. "No, she's having an operation today. No food." The nurse pointed to a sign above Liz's bed that read, "Nil by mouth." The large lady in blue rolled her eyes, picked the tray up and pushed her way past the nurse without saying anything further. "Sorry about that," the nurse said to Liz. "They get a bit cranky sometimes." Liz was craving to have a hot cup of coffee. "So I'm having the operation today? No one told me that I was definitely having it today." "We got a placing for you late last night. You're having it at 1 p.m. today. Doctor is doing his rounds now and will be in to talk to you shortly," the nurse said. Liz was pleased to see the same doctor as she had the previous day walk through the door. The doctor looked at her and folded his arms. "Do you remember me?" "Yes, from yesterday." Liz thought she must look a mess. She hadn't even brushed her hair or washed her face. The doctor looked around the room. "Your constant companion has left you alone?" "Oh, Ephraim. Yes, he's a good friend." Liz would have liked to say he was her boyfriend. The doctor had brought the same x-rays with him and explained exactly what he planned to do in the operation. He had even brought in pins and plates to show her. It was all making Liz feel a bit woozy. "I don't mean to be rude, but just do what you have to do. I'd rather not know." The doctor looked at her as if she was the only one who had ever said anything of the kind to him. "Most people do want to know, Miss Coons." Liz yawned. She really wanted that coffee. "I'm not most people." "I can see that." The doctor smiled and placed her x-rays carefully in an envelope. "I will see you and your leg later today." Thank you, doctor. I appreciate your help and your work. I'm Dr. Kozlowski. Anthony Kozlowski. You can call me Tony. Okay, thank you very much, Tony, she replied. Liz watched her doctor walk out of the room. He was a very handsome man, not as tall as Ephraim, but just as handsome, in a different sort of way. Liz wondered if he was married. She had not seen a ring on his finger, and most English men seemed to wear wedding rings. Tony was the sort of man that Liz had always wanted to marry: smart, handsome, successful with a good job. If she married a man like Tony, she could have the life she always wanted, whereas if she married Ephraim, she would have to return to the Amish and live a life that was, to her, most uncomfortable. Liz again deliberated if she should call someone. Her friends, the Millers, would have to come by taxi, and she did not want to inconvenience them. Then there were her parents. Liz decided not to call her parents, not today. She wanted to see them when her life was going well, not when she was having a crisis. She never wanted to hear the words, "I told you so," from them. Sometimes Liz thought that her parents wanted to see her fail. Being a Sunday, she would call work tomorrow and let them know she would have to have a little time off. Liz decided not to call anyone. Chapter 9. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11:1. Liz awoke from the operation to a nurse shaking her on the shoulder. She stared around the small, sterile room and realized she was in some sort of recovery ward. She hoped the operation was over. "Wake up, honey. Do you feel all right?" the nurse asked. Liz tried to nod as she was too tired to speak, but she was not able to. The nurse leaned over her and looked directly into her face. "Try and say something, honey." Liz felt like saying, "Stop calling me honey," but couldn't even manage that. After a while, she said, "I'm awake." She tried to sit up. "No, don't sit up. Lie still. You may feel a little sick in the tummy if you get up too fast." The nurse immediately put her hands lightly to Liz's shoulders. The doctor said the operation went fine. Liz slumped back down, pleased that all had gone well, and closed her eyes. She felt like she had been in a beautiful, serene slumber and wanted to return to it. "I wish I could sleep like this every night," she thought. Her thoughts immediately turned to Ephraim. It was the second Sunday, so she knew he would be at his church meeting. That would be a perfect place for Ephraim's mother to push Ruth onto him again. Ruth was a sweet girl, and probably would make someone a good wife. But not my Ephraim, Liz thought. After some time, she was wheeled, still in her bed, back to her room. She hoped Ephraim would be waiting for her, but there was no one. Liz dozed until the doctor came to check on her that evening. "How are you feeling?" "I'm feeling all right, just very tired," she replied. "Well, that's only normal." The doctor picked up her chart at the end of her bed and studied it. "The operation went very well, but we'll need to keep an eye on you here for a few days." The doctor sat in the chair. "Do you have family?" "I do, but I'm not on speaking terms with them at the moment." Liz felt a little embarrassed to reveal something so personal, but he was a doctor. "Tell me, how do you come to have an Amish friend?" Liz was sure this doctor was asking personal questions, which were beyond what he needed to know for medical reasons. "I was brought up Amish, so I've known him for some time." The doctor laughed. "We have something in common then. I was raised Mennonite." Liz opened her mouth in surprise. "Really? We do have a lot in common then. Why did you leave?" "I left to become a doctor. My parents didn't see why I felt the need to have an education beyond what they themselves had, but I had a thirst for learning. I worked my way through school and was lucky enough to win a scholarship to medical school." Liz realized he must be smart to win a scholarship. He seemed almost humble and embarrassed to speak of his success. "Do you ever regret leaving?" she asked. "I'm still Mennonite inside. I've left the Mennonite family, but it hasn't left me. I think I will always feel this way." Liz knew exactly what he meant, as she had to continually fight against feeling Amish deep inside. Liz studied the doctor's face. Determination was etched into his chiseled features, and Liz guessed that he would be just as dependable as his solid physique. Could Tony be the man God had for her? If she were to marry Tony, she would not have to return to the Amish like she would if she married Ephraim. Love aside, she had to think with her head this time and not get carried away like she had when she fell in love with David. Her relationship with David had been nothing but a disaster, and she had let her heart rule her head. This time she would pick a man with her head and leave her heart behind the door. The doctor rose quickly to his feet. "I will come back and check on you this evening." "You work long hours," she said. "I'm not on the clock right now," he replied. He smiled and leaned toward her and lowered his voice. "I will be visiting you in my free time." Liz felt heat rise to her cheeks as she smiled back at him. At that moment, Ephraim walked through the door. "Hello, doctor." Ephraim nodded his head to the doctor as he walked toward the bed. "Hello. She's doing very well." The doctor looked from Ephraim back to Liz. "I will see you a little later." "Yes, thank you, Tony." The doctor walked out the door. Liz compared the two men. The doctor was all clean, neat, and polished, whereas Ephraim was somewhat messy, rough, and rugged. Liz considered that both men were handsome in very different ways. Ephraim sat on the chair. "I'm sorry I couldn't get here earlier. The meeting was at my place today and it was difficult to get away," he told her. Liz knew how much work it was for a family when their turn came to have the meeting at their house. "That's okay, thanks for coming. I've been sleeping most of the time." "Do you feel sick at all?" he asked as he sat in the chair. Liz pushed her hair away from her face and tucked it behind her ears. "No, they said I might feel a bit sick, but I feel fine." "Do you need me to bring you anything, Liz? A change of clothes, nightdress or something?" "No, I'll just wear the hospital gown. It's fine." Liz would have loved to have some of her own things, but she did not want to send Ephraim to her apartment to look through her underwear drawer, and she did not want to bother Kate or Annie either. She was pleased that at least she had a little makeup in her handbag, which she would put on when she felt better. "The doctor seems pretty friendly," he said. "Yes, he's been really nice. He tells me he was raised Mennonite," she replied. Ephraim just nodded and did not say a word. A few minutes later he said, "Does your leg hurt?" "Not at the moment. I've had so many painkillers that they say it won't hurt today, but I may feel a little pain tomorrow," she told him. Liz's heart definitely belonged to Ephraim. She loved his company and felt at home when he was around. However, the doctor was a much more logical choice, and it was clear to Liz that the doctor was very interested in her, and she had to think of her future. "Ephraim, you must have things to do. You don't have to stay with me. I'll be all right," she said. "Nonsense. It's my fault you are here. I want to make sure you'll be okay. I'll stay for a while longer," he replied. Liz fell into a drowsy sleep, and when she woke up, it was dark and Ephraim was not in the chair next to her. She saw a shaft of light fill the room and realized that someone was pushing the door open. "Are you awake, Liz?" Liz knew immediately it was the mellow tones of her doctor's voice. She looked at the chair next to her and saw that Ephraim had gone. "Yes, I'm awake." Liz's doctor pushed the door open fully and placed a posy of daisies on the bedside table. He stood at the side of the bed. "I brought you some flowers." "Oh, that's so nice of you. Do you do that for all your patients?" she asked. "Only the special ones. Only the Amish ones who hurt their legs in arguments with horses," he replied. Liz giggled and wished she could have been wearing makeup or had her hair nicely styled. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Liz tried to prop herself up on her pillows. "I'm not feeling any pain yet." "You probably will tomorrow. Enjoy it while you can. You'll still have the anesthetic in your system." The doctor picked up Liz's wrist to check her pulse. Liz wondered whether he really needed to do that, as the nurses checked on her pulse and blood pressure every 2 hours. She wondered whether it was an excuse to touch her. He placed her hand back down on the bed. "Seems good." "Are you going home now? It must be late." She remembered he'd said he wasn't on the clock, and that was hours ago. "Yes, soon," he said as he sat down on the bed beside her. "Do you live far from here?" she asked. Liz really wanted to know if he was married and was trying to ask questions to lead him into giving her the answer, rather than her having to ask him straight out. "Not far. I've got an apartment in walking distance. If I'm called in for an emergency, I don't have far to go," he replied. "Sounds like you're really dedicated, like this is your whole life," she observed. Tony smiled, revealing perfect white teeth. "It is. I'm not married, so I don't have a family or anything to take up my time." There, that was the answer that Liz was hoping to hear. "The hospital is very lucky, then, to have your full attention," she told him. "Thank you. You get some sleep now and I'll see you tomorrow, he replied. Liz snuggled into her pillow. Night, Tony. Everything about him seems to be perfect, Liz thought. This man would be a good match for me. He's smart, makes a lot of money, and he's kind and dedicated to helping people. What more could a girl ask? Liz answered herself that a girl could ask to be in love, but being carried away with silly feelings of love had led her into trouble once before. Chapter 10. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27:1. Ephraim thought himself very brave for kissing Liz goodnight on that Sunday evening. She had fallen asleep and looked as beautiful as he imagined one of God's angels to be. He was a little concerned that her doctor was not only good-looking, but he had something very much in common with Liz, having left the Mennonite community just as Liz had left the Amish. Ephraim arrived back to his house to find that Ruth Gruber was one of the few people who had stayed after the church service to share an evening meal with the family. This was the first time that Ruth had stayed on after a service, and Ephraim was sure that his mother had something to do with it. Ruth was very much involved with cooking the evening meal, along with 2 other women. Ephraim had not told any of his family about Liz's accident. Ephraim's mom pulled him aside to have a private talk with him as soon as he came through the door. Let's go out to the porch. There's something I want to discuss with you. Once they were out of earshot of the people who were staying for the meal, his mom said, What do you think of Ruth? She asked. Ephraim knew exactly what his mom was trying to do. Mom, I'm not interested in Ruth. Why not? She's a good girl and she'd make you a good wife. Ephraim looked around to make sure no one would be able to hear them. Mom, leave it alone. I'll pick my own wife, thank you. His mom put her hands on her wide hips and looked up at him. It's not all about looks, though. Don't go for the pretty girl. Looks don't last. Ephraim knew that his mother was referring specifically to Liz. At first he was drawn to Liz because of her beauty, but it was her personality and good heart that kept him interested. I'm not going to dismiss a girl just because she is pretty, Mom. Wouldn't that be just as bad as only liking a girl because she is pretty? He asked. Don't try and twist what I'm saying to you. Is a pretty girl like Liz going to want to make you happy above herself? Ephraim was not sure how to answer his mom. All he knew was that he wanted Liz, and he sure did not want to lose her to the handsome ex-Mennonite doctor who was showing an obvious interest in her. I don't know what you want from me, Mom. I just don't want to get married for the sake of being married. I don't need to be married. I don't know where you get these strange notions from, Ephraim. Every man should want to be married. How could he tell his mom that Liz was the only woman he had ever met that he wanted to marry? His mother's voice rose. Ruth is a very good Christian woman. I don't know why you can't see that. Ephraim put both hands on his mother's shoulders, trying to calm her down. I know, Mom, I know. He wanted to tell his mother that Ruth was plain in mind and plain to look at. He knew he should not be concerned about what the outside of a person looked like. But he did want a wife that was pleasing to the eyes, as well as a woman who he could really talk to. Liz was just such a woman, someone he could talk to about anything, and she was pleasant to look at. Ephraim considered her pleasing looks as an added bonus. His mother was not going to give up easily. Where was Liz today? Was Liz at the meeting? No. You need a girl who has the same beliefs as you. You don't want to be drawn away from God, do you? No, Mom, I don't want to be drawn away. I've been baptized, remember. I'm staying in the community, and I've made that decision. It seemed to Ephraim that his mother was throwing every reason at him why he should be interested in Ruth and not in Liz. Now you stop worrying so much about me. You've got guests to worry about. The way his mother raised her eyebrows at him and tossed her head back, he knew he had not heard the last of the subject. Throughout the meal, it seemed as everyone was trying to throw Ephraim and Ruth together. Selena, one of the older ladies, made sure she told Ephraim that Ruth had cooked the lamb after he commented how good it was. The other older lady pointedly told Ephraim how good Ruth was at quilting. It was so obvious that everyone was trying to match them as a pair that Ephraim became quite embarrassed for poor Ruth. He had glanced at Ruth once or twice, but she had avoided eye contact with him. But he noticed her cheeks were somewhat red, which he put down to pure embarrassment. After dinner, the women were busy washing up in the kitchen, and the men sat down in the living area. Ephraim did not get involved in the conversation, as all he could think of was Liz and whether she was all right. He wondered whether it would be too late at night to go back into the hospital to check on her. He decided it would be. He remembered seeing a telephone next to her hospital bed. He decided that he would wait until the visitors left and would call her from his telephone in the barn. It seemed to take longer than it usually did for all the guests to leave, but as soon as they did, Ephraim headed directly to the barn. The phone rang quite a few times, and then Liz's phone was answered by a male voice. Ephraim responded to the man's hello. "Hello, do I have Liz Kuhn's room?" "Yes, you do. I'll put her on," he replied. Ephraim recognized the voice as the doctor's. What is he doing in her room so late at night? "Ephraim," Liz said. "Yes, it's me. Was that the doctor? Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine, still very tired. The doctor was just doing his last rounds for the night," she replied. "Oh, good, I'm glad you're okay. I was going to come back out, but we had a few late visitors who have only just left," he told her. "Oh, I didn't expect you to come back. Don't worry about me, I'm fine." Ephraim was pleased to hear her voice. "Sleep well then, and I'll come to see you tomorrow," he said. When Ephraim hung up the phone, he was quite concerned that the doctor was still there at that late hour. "He must be interested in her, and there is not a lot that I can do about it. He's got her to himself while she's in hospital. The whole situation was out of Ephraim's control. If I hadn't talked her into leading that horse, then she wouldn't have broken her leg and she wouldn't have met that doctor." As he closed the barn door for the night and headed back to the house, he saw his mother's silhouette waiting at the door. "Another lecture, Mom?" "No, let's sit." They both sat on the porch chairs in the moonlight. "So it's Liz you're fond of," she said. "Yeah, Mom, very much," he replied. "Well, do you think it's fair on her if you like her? You'd better tell her of your medical history then, hadn't you?" Ephraim had never told anyone of his medical history. That was a secret he had kept to himself, and the last thing he wanted to reveal to Liz. "I will tell her when the time is right, not before then," he replied. His mother nodded, stood to her feet, and kissed him on the forehead. "Good night, then." "Good night, Mom," he replied. Ephraim knew his mom was right. If he ever got closer to Liz, he needed to tell her his secret. He also needed to tell her all the terrible things he had done in recent years. A few years ago, he told a lie to Benjamin about Kate, which caused Benjamin to marry another woman instead of Kate. He had also told Sarah that John was engaged to an English woman. The truth was, John had been engaged to someone back home, but when he met Sarah, he called off the engagement as soon as he went back to Ohio. Ephraim regretted the fact that people had suffered because of his lies and half-truths. Kate and Benjamin had eventually got married, but only due to the tragic death of Benjamin's first wife. John and Sarah nearly did not get married because of him, and Sarah would have been a single parent and had to live with the shame she would have brought on her family. Ephraim knew that his behavior was due to the dissatisfaction of his own life. It was only once he saw the suffering he had caused that he repented of his ways and was baptized into the Amish church. Ephraim hoped that Liz had not heard how he had hurt people by his meddling. She most likely has heard. Since Kate and Sarah are good friends of hers, he thought, well, if I'm going to win her heart, I'm going to have to come clean and tell her everything. Then she will have to decide for herself how she feels about me. Ephraim knew that honesty was the only way. Being dishonest and deceitful had only hurt himself and the people around him. Chapter 11. Know therefore that the Lord thy God, he is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. Deuteronomy 7:9. Liz woke up early the next morning to a very sore leg. The cast felt as if it were far too tight. She tore the sheet off and saw that her toes looked very swollen and pink. She pressed the call button for the nurse. A nurse put her head around the door. "Yes?" "My leg's hurting a lot and I think the plaster is too tight or something," she said. The nurse did not look very concerned, but Liz knew there was something wrong. "I think I'm badly swollen," she told the nurse. The nurse stepped through the door. "I'll take a look." The nurse took one look at Liz's swollen red toes and said, "Looks like we'll have to get the cast off." She looked at her watch. "Doctor will be here soon. I'll have him come straight to you." A few minutes later, Tony came through her door. "You're quite swollen. We'll have to cut this one off and put another one on," he said. "Will it hurt?" Liz knew her face was all screwed up, and she would have looked very unappealing to Tony at this point. He pulled at the bottom of the cast. "Is it hurting now?" he asked. "Yes, it's hurting badly." "It won't hurt as much as it is now. A new cast will relieve the pain," he told her. Liz slumped back into her pillow. "Good." Liz glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 10 minutes past 7. She wondered when Ephraim would come in to see her. He always wakes up fairly early to get everything done, so maybe he might be here around midday. Liz hoped she would have a chance to talk more with Tony while he changed her cast. But unfortunately, it wasn't him who did the task. It seemed to take forever for the cast to be cut off and for the new one to be applied. Liz could not even bear to look at her leg and deliberately avoided the sight of it while they were tending to it. She did not know if she would have screws and metal things poking out of her leg, and she did not want to know. She shut her eyes tightly through the procedure. It was mid-afternoon when Liz was wheeled back to her room. From the end of the hallway, she saw Ephraim at the entrance of her room. He looked up and caught her eye. "Liz, are you all right?" he asked. "Yes, my leg just got badly swollen and they had to put a new cast on," she told him. Liz was thankful that they were able to wheel her whole bed around so she didn't have to get in and out of wheelchairs. Ephraim waited until they were alone before he spoke. "Is that a normal thing to happen, or did your Dr. Tony make a mistake?" "They told me that it was something that could happen. It's fairly common." Liz wondered if jealousy had sparked Ephraim's comment about her doctor. "It hurts a lot less now, too." Ephraim sat in the chair next to her bed. "Sorry I couldn't be here earlier," he said. "You don't need to come all the time. I'll be okay," she said. "That's what friends are for. Besides, it's my fault that you're in here, remember?" he replied. Liz was a little disappointed in his words. Didn't he want to be more than friends? She knew that Ephraim liked her, but why couldn't he just admit to it? Why did he have to hide behind silly reasons to see her? Liz would have preferred him to come straight out and say he was attracted to her. She wanted to hear that he could not keep himself away if he tried. "There's probably too much against us anyway. He'll probably end up marrying Ruth, especially if his mother has any say in it," Liz thought. Liz noticed a small green bag in Ephraim's hands and wondered whether if it was something for her. "I brought you some things I thought you might need." He handed the bag to her. "Oh, thank you, Ephraim." She smiled sweetly at him. The package contained toothpaste, toothbrush, deodorant, soap, and some facial wipes. "So thoughtful, thank you. The lady at the pharmacy helped me. I'm not used to buying things for women," he said as he took the package from her. "Shall I just put it in this drawer?" he asked. Liz nodded. "Can I get you anything else or bring in something for you?" "No, I'm fine, really." Liz saw Ephraim's eyes gravitate toward the flowers on the side table. "Nice flowers." "Yes, they're lovely. They're from my doctor," she replied. Ephraim hit his head with his hand. "I'm such an idiot, Liz. Will you forgive me? I'm not used to having a lady in my life that I don't realize about things like flowers and the like," he told her. Liz was taken aback by his words. Does he think we have some sort of relationship? She did not want herself or Ephraim to get hurt, so thought it best to be very direct with him. "A lady in your life?" she said. "I know it's only early days, but I have to tell you, at some point I want you to be the lady in my life. You don't need to say anything. I just want to tell you how I'm feeling. If you don't feel the same, then that's fine," he said. Swirling lights in front of Liz's eyes caused her head to swim, and she did not know how to respond to his shocking statement. It was what she wanted to hear. Part of her was flattered and pleased, but the other part of her could not see how a relationship between them would ever work out. "I don't feel well," is all that she could say, as her head sank further into the pillow and her eyes closed. A nurse woke Liz up later that day to take her vital signs, as they did quite often during the day and the night. "How are you feeling then?" This was the same disinterested nurse Liz had encountered earlier that day. "Much better, thanks." Liz looked at the empty chair beside the bed and saw that Ephraim had left. It was obvious she had fallen asleep while Ephraim was speaking to her, and now he had gone. I hope he wasn't upset with me when I didn't say I felt the same as he did. Clearly, they both liked each other and had for some time, but neither of them had been brave enough to put their feelings into words. Surely he sees that no matter how much we like each other, we could never be a real couple and get married or anything. I hope he didn't leave thinking I pretended to fall asleep as a way of getting out of responding to him. Liz was concerned at Ephraim's sudden disappearance and tortured herself with visions of him running into Ruth's open arms, with his mother smiling gleefully in the background. Just before the nurse walked out, Liz asked, "Do you know how much longer I will be in here?" The nurse shrugged her shoulders. "Another week, I'd imagine. The doctor's doing his rounds so you can ask him when he comes to see you." Another week? Liz groaned inside and wondered what her boss would think of her taking a whole week off. Chapter 12. As for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is tried. He is a buckler to all them that trust in him. 2 Samuel 22:31. Ephraim saw that Liz had fallen into a dopey sleep and thought that they must have given her some heavy-duty sleep medication. Perhaps she won't remember what I said before she fell asleep, he thought. I should have been the one to give her flowers. Women like that sort of thing, especially a woman like Liz. Thinking that Liz may be asleep for many more hours, Ephraim left the hospital and went back to the farm to finish some chores and get some work done on his business. The only way that Ephraim and Liz could be together was if Liz returned to the community, and at that moment, Ephraim seriously doubted that could ever happen. Especially with a handsome English doctor paying her a lot of attention and giving her flowers. He can offer her the world, and what can I offer her? Only a life that she has already rejected. Ephraim decided not to go back that night and not to phone her. If Liz did not feel the same, he would have to withdraw from her totally and never see her again. He knew they were unsuited, yet he found himself drawn to her. The only way he could break the cycle of knowing she was no good for him and still seeing her was to put an end to it altogether. Liz was sure Ephraim would return later that night, and she would talk to him then and tell him honestly how she felt about him. She would say she liked him too, but doubted that anything could ever come of it. Is the leg better? Liz looked up and saw Tony, her doctor, in the doorway. Hello, it's much better, thank you. He picked up her chart hanging from the rail at the end of the bed. All looks good, he said. How much longer do you think I will be in here? Tony laughed and put her chart back on the rail at the end of the bed. Are you anxious to leave me already? He asked. Liz smiled a little. I do have a job. They aren't entirely happy with me taking time off, she replied. Tony moved closer to the end of the bed. Another few days. We won't know for sure until we see how you go. Liz sighed. Tony sat on the bed next to her. It was a very complicated fracture, he told her. Liz was glad he did not have the x-rays with him, so at least he would not try to explain what they did with the pins and everything again. I know. Liz, tell me this. Tony folded his arms in front of him and leaned back a little way. When you get out of here, will you have dinner with me? Liz was a little surprised. She knew that he liked her, but had not expected that he would ask her out so suddenly. I'd like that. The doctor smiled. You sure that Amish man isn't your boyfriend or anything? Liz knew that Tony was saying that as a joke because he already knew that Ephraim was not her boyfriend. Not at all. Under different circumstances, Liz would have loved it if Ephraim was her boyfriend, but he was not, and Liz knew that he never would be. I won't be in later tonight. I have a tennis game tonight. I play once a week with a few of the hospital staff, he said. Liz wondered if tennis was what kept him looking so fit. He wasn't as tall as Ephraim, but his build was nearly as solid. That sounds good. Have fun, she replied. I'll see you tomorrow. Tony gave her a little wink as he left. Liz was pleased that Tony would not be there that night because that would give her a chance to talk to Ephraim without interruption. She considered that what she had to say to him could not wait too much longer, and was best said before one of them got hurt. Only that night, Ephraim did not show up. Liz tried to watch television, but her mind kept worrying about what was going through Ephraim's mind. She wondered if she should phone him. He might be in the barn working on his computer at this time of night. Liz resisted the urge to call him. She would just wait and speak to him face to face. It was hard to think of going on a date with the doctor when the only man she really wanted to go on a date with was Ephraim. It was going to be hard to tell Ephraim that she was not interested in him. But it was something Liz was determined to do, now that she was letting her head rule her heart. Suddenly a thought hit her out of nowhere. She did not know why this had not occurred to her before. How was she going to get up all the flights of stairs to her condo with her leg in plaster? She thought of all the people she could possibly stay with until her leg was able to handle stairs. There were the Millers, and their 3 married daughters. She knew she would be welcome to stay with any one of them. The trouble was that they were all Amish, and the bishop had already told the Millers she could no longer stay there. Although the Miller's daughter Sarah was not Amish, she lived in an upstairs apartment. Liz knew her parents would not have her at their place unless she went back to the Amish way of life. An overwhelming feeling that she was all alone in the world caused tears to trickle down Liz's face. Dr. Tony breezed through the door the moment Liz began to wipe the tears from her face. "Are you crying?" he asked. Liz was surprised to see Tony back as he said he was leaving for the day. Embarrassment mixed with hopelessness caused Liz to cry some more. "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not usually like this," she replied. Tony sat down on the bed. "It's only normal to feel emotional in this place. Even I cry about it sometimes," he told her. Liz gave a little giggle between sobs. Liz looked at Tony and saw that he had kind eyes, which matched his pleasant-looking face. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Tony pulled Liz's hand away from her face so he could look into her eyes. Liz managed to say between sobs, "I've got stairs at home." "Do you have anyone you can stay with?" he asked. Liz shook her head and took a deep breath in an effort to stop crying. "Don't cry. There are places you can go until you can look after yourself. Mind you, they aren't very nice places." Liz stopped crying when she realized she would have somewhere to go at least, even if it wasn't nice. "You could come to my place. I'm on the ground floor. It would be perfect," he offered. Liz managed to smile. "No, I couldn't do that. I don't even know you that well. You don't know me that well," she replied. "Nonsense. You can stay with me. I have a big apartment with 2 spare bedrooms and a spare bathroom that no one ever uses. I would love to have you as my guest," he told her. "Thank you, but I just couldn't inconvenience you like that," she said. "It's settled. You will stay at my place. It should only be for a week or 2 until you can make it up the stairs," he said. Liz shook her head in protest. "Try and get some rest now, and remember, doctor knows best. Now I must go and beat someone at tennis." Liz smiled back at her doctor as he walked out the door. Ephraim wished he had gone to see Liz that night because he could not sleep a wink. He was worried about how she was, and worried that the doctor may whisk her away from under his nose. As soon as it was light and he got his morning chores over with, he headed to the hospital. The hospital staff seemed to recognize him already, since no one stopped him from walking around the ward outside visiting hours. He pushed her door open a little and peered in. Ephraim saw that she was sleeping soundly, so he sat on the chair as quietly as he possibly could, so he would not wake her. Chapter 13. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Proverbs 3, 5, 6. When Liz woke up and realized where she was, she turned her head to the chair beside the bed, hoping Ephraim was there. To her delight, Ephraim was dozing in the chair next to her. She closed her eyes and basked in the comforting feeling she always had when Ephraim was close to her. He always made her feel safe and protected. How would she tell him that the doctor had offered for her to stay at his apartment? He would definitely not be pleased about that. She opened her eyes again and looked over at Ephraim. He had the same familiar clothes on, as always, the black pants, black suspenders, and the white billowy shirt. "Liz, you're awake." Liz hoped that he hadn't caught the adoration in her eyes as she studied him. "Yes, only just." "When did you get here?" "Just a little while ago. I think I dozed off for a while. How are you feeling today?" he asked. "My leg isn't hurting as much today." Liz wondered how she was going to tell Ephraim, and when would be the right time to tell him. "Good morning, Liz." The doctor pushed the door open, and his eyes were quickly drawn to Ephraim. "Oh, hello. Ephraim, isn't it?" he asked. Ephraim rose to his feet. "Yes, doctor, hello. Do you need me to leave?" The doctor folded his stethoscope and put it in his large white coat pocket. "No, this is just a social call before I start my rounds." He went to the opposite side of the bed to where Ephraim was. "How are you feeling, Liz?" he asked. Much better today, thanks. I'm spoiled for choice, Liz thought. I've got 2 very handsome men here, one who my head would choose and one who my heart desires. She knew both men liked her very much, and the choice between the 2 men lay with her. The doctor looked at Ephraim and back to Liz. Well, I'll be back to see you in a little while, he said. The doctor and Ephraim nodded their goodbyes to one another. Ephraim sat back in the chair. That was a quick visit. Maybe he didn't want to have his social visit with me here. Liz seized her opportunity to speak to Ephraim of Tony's offer. The doctor has offered for me to stay at his apartment when I get out of here, just until I can make it up the stairs to my apartment, she told him. His own apartment where he's living? Or does he have a spare apartment somewhere? He asked. It's his own apartment, and it's on the first floor with no stairs. Otherwise, I will have to go to a rehabilitation center, which I'm told is not very nice. I've got no one else to stay with, and the bishop wouldn't like it if I stayed back at the Millers or with Kate. He told the Millers that I couldn't stay there any longer. That goes above and beyond his duty, doesn't it, Liz? He asked. Liz could tell by the tone in Ephraim's voice that he was not happy at all with the prospect of her staying with Tony, the handsome doctor. I guess it does, but he probably knows what it's like coming out of the Amish and being by yourself in a different world. He probably went through similar situations when he left his community, she replied. I'll speak to the bishop and see if you can stay at Kate's, if you prefer, he offered. No, Ephraim, I'm not Amish anymore, and I don't want anyone consulting the bishop on my behalf. Liz hoped that Ephraim would understand that she was finally free of the bishop and what the community thought of her, and she did not want to have to ask him for any special favors. I know, but Liz, this man is a stranger to you, he said. He's a doctor. I'm sure he's safe and everything. He'd have to protect his reputation and everything. I'm sure he won't murder me or anything, she replied. Liz. Ephraim reached out and held Liz's hand. I'm not worried about him murdering you, he told her. Ephraim, about what you said the other day, when you said that you liked me. Yes, he asked. Liz took a deep breath. She did not want him to take what she said the wrong way, nor did she want to leave him with the notion that there was still a chance between them. How would it ever work out between the 2 of us? You're Amish and I'm not. You know, she replied. Ephraim was silent for a moment. I'm drawn to you, Liz. Liz looked down at their hands, which were clasped tightly together. She could feel his eyes burning through her, to her very soul. He knows how I feel for him, I'm sure. What are your feelings for me, Liz? He asked. Liz closed her eyes. She wished she did not have to say what she knew she had to. I can't say what I feel. There would be no point to it, she replied. Do you want me to leave you alone forever? He asked. Maybe it would be for the best, Ephraim, for both of us. There is no point continuing to see each other to the point where one of us gets hurt. Liz felt like adding, besides that, your mother hates me, and she will be pleased to see you married to anyone but me. I don't agree with you, Liz. I believe that a way will be made for us, but I will go along with your wishes. I can see you have your mind made up. He let go of Liz's hand, leaned forward, and kissed her lightly on the forehead. Without any further words between the 2 of them, Ephraim walked away. Liz put her hand up to her mouth and bit lightly on her knuckles, while she contemplated whether she had done the right thing. Or had she just let the best man in the world for her walk right out of her life? Deep inside her heart, she felt as though her whole life and reason for existing was walking away from her. Even so, she fought the impulse to call him back. Liz fell into a dopey sleep and was awoken 2 hours later by a visit from her friend Sarah and her new baby Miriam. How did you know I was in here? She asked. Sarah leaned forward and kissed her on the cheek. Ephraim asked John to let me know. So how did all this happen? Sarah asked. Let me see the baby first. Is she asleep? Liz asked. Yeah, finally, Sarah giggled. She's not an easy baby like Kate's. Sarah sat down and listened while Liz told her the whole story of how she'd come to hurt her leg, of her feelings for Ephraim, and Dr. Tony's offer. You certainly have a lot going on in your life. Sarah tilted her head to one side. I hope I get to see your Dr. Tony while I'm here. Do you think I should take him up on his offer to stay at his place? She asked. I don't know, Liz. It's a difficult decision. Does he have any ulterior motives? I guess he does like me, if that's what you mean, she replied. It seems a little odd, that's all. I mean, he's giving you special treatment, so what does he want in return? Sarah asked. Liz sighed. She was out of one complication into another. She did like the doctor, but wasn't sure if those feelings would ever develop into anything deeper. I will take him up on his offer. I don't really have a lot of other choices. Sarah said, You could come and stay with us. We aren't back in the Amish community yet, we just moved into a house. Really? That would be wonderful, Sarah. Do you have to check with John? Liz asked. No, he would love to have you come and stay for a while. Liz felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She hadn't realized how her neck and shoulders had been tight due to the stress she had been holding on to. Now, her whole body was able to relax and soften. Liz looked at baby Miriam sleeping peacefully. She's so beautiful. She is when she's asleep. Otherwise, she's a bit of a handful. Try not to worry too much. One thing I've learned is that worry never gets you anywhere. Look at my situation. I was having the baby and had nowhere to turn when God suddenly turned everything around for me, and my life is wonderful. Liz nodded. She wanted to believe that God would do good things for her, but she had left the Amish ways behind her. She believed that God was still with her, but she did not want to rely on God too much through fear that she may end back in the Amish community. It's hard to believe, though, now I've left the community. God is not only in the community, Liz. God can still be with you. You just have to believe. Liz pursed her lips tightly together and nodded. Sarah persisted by saying, It's true. Just pray for God to work your life out and He will. He did for me. Sarah's words were nice to hear. Only Sarah wanted to stay in the community because she had always been happy there. With Liz, it was different. Liz did not want to go back to the community. She was sure she had made the right decision regarding the words she had just spoken to Ephraim. Surely he could see that their relationship would never work, and he would be far better off with a good Christian Amish woman. Sarah reached into a large bag that was popped under the tray of her pram. I brought this in for you. Liz opened up the folded piece of material and found embroidery cotton and needles in the center. Liz was drawn to the past, to a time when she would sit and happily embroider for hours. Remember how you used to do these all the time? Oh, that's wonderful. I was getting so bored. Thank you. Now I have something to do. You're welcome, Sarah said. Liz unfolded the material completely and saw that there was a scripture on it ready to be embroidered. The scripture read, In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. It's just perfect, Sarah, thank you. Liz considered it a direct message to her from God. If she acknowledged him in everything, he would look after her and direct her ways. Liz felt comforted that God was watching over her. Chapter 14. Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing, and obtaineth favor of the Lord. Proverbs 18:22. A week later, Liz was able to leave the hospital. She had not seen Ephraim for days. Liz knew that he probably still thought that she was going to stay at Tony's apartment. She missed Ephraim terribly, but knew that her decision not to see him at all was for the best. Tony opened the door of the car for Liz after they had pulled up at Sarah's house. Now let's see how good you are on those crutches, he said. He helped her from the car. Liz tucked the crutches under her arms and leaned on them. I'm much better now. I could beat you in a race. Tony laughed. Sarah came out of the house and stood on the porch with baby Miriam on her hip. Sarah directed them to the lounge room. Can you put Liz's things in that room over there, please, Tony? Liz sat on the couch. Do you need a chair under your leg or anything? Sarah asked. Tony came back into the lounge room. Yes, she needs to keep it elevated as much as possible. She also needs practice on those crutches. Can you see she gets that practice, please? She's a bit lazy, he said. Liz laughed and tried to hit him with a cushion, but he was too far away. I'd better get back to the hospital. He bent over and said in a low voice to Liz, Don't forget we have a dinner date on Friday night. I'll pick you up at 8. Liz nodded, knowing that she would have to explain their relationship to Sarah now she had heard him speak of a date. Just as the doctor drove off in his deep charcoal gray Jaguar, Sarah asked, So what's going on with you two? Liz rolled her eyes and her lips turned slightly upwards at the corners. As you heard, we have a date on Friday night. And? Sarah sat down on the couch next to Liz and placed Miriam on her lap. "Just a minute. I'll put her down for her afternoon sleep. Don't go anywhere." Liz laughed. "I won't. Good night, Miriam." Sarah brought the baby to Liz. "Kiss Auntie Liz goodnight." Miriam rubbed her eyes and began to whine. Okay. Bedtime coming up." While Sarah settled Miriam for her nap, Liz couldn't help but compare the two men, Ephraim and Tony, once more. Both of them would make wonderful husbands. Liz was sure of that. One would make a wonderful Amish husband, and the other a wonderful English husband. Tony had brought her flowers, whereas Ephraim had brought her more practical things which she really needed. It's no good thinking of Ephraim now. He thinks I have no interest in him. I've most likely lost him. "Back again." Sarah jumped on the couch and tucked her legs underneath her and looked eagerly at Liz. "Now fill me in. What's going on with you and the handsome doctor?" "He's nice." Liz could not even begin to explain her complicated feelings to Sarah. "You heard we're going on a date on Friday and that's all there is to tell." Sarah pulled a face. "Do you like him?" "Yes, I like him. He's very nice." Sarah shook her head and laughed. "Oh dear, nice. Again. Don't start. I was at Kate's house the other day and Annie was there too. They were telling me that I need to go against my usual attraction to the bad boys and start being interested in men who will treat me properly." "So you think Ephraim is a bad boy?" "I didn't mention him at all." Sarah smiled. "I've known for a while that you and Ephraim have this thing going." "What thing?" "A thing. That you both like each other. It's so obvious." Liz was about to say something when Sarah held up her hand with her palm facing Liz. "Stop. Don't deny it. I'm just making an observation. I know you like him and you can't say you don't." Liz put her other leg up. "I wasn't going to deny it. Well, I probably was, but the thing is, Ephraim is Amish." "Is that what is stopping you?" Liz wondered if that was the only thing stopping her from liking Ephraim. He had done some bad things that she knew of, that were also a factor in her ruling him out as a potential suitor. "He's done some bad things in the past. Haven't we all, Liz?" Sarah had made a big mistake and had a baby out of wedlock, but God had turned her life around, and John, her husband, and Sarah had plans of returning to the Amish. Sarah continued, "I think he's changed. John and Ephraim spend a fair amount of time together, so I see a little of Ephraim. I do think he has changed." Liz nodded in agreement with Sarah, but inside she told herself that it did not matter if he had changed because he was still Amish. "Anyhow, that's how things are. I've got a date with the doctor." Friday night came around fairly quickly, and Liz had become an expert on using the crutches. Finally, Tony can see me in some nice clothes and with her makeup and hair done properly, rather than in the hospital gown with no makeup. Tony knocked on Sarah's door, and Liz was sure she was the one to answer it. "Liz, wow, you look like a different person." Liz figured he liked what he saw, even though he had not said as much. "Well, this is me. When I'm not in hospital, that is." Tony was dressed very smartly in black pants and a black shirt, which had the top button undone. In the car on the way to the restaurant, Liz found out a lot more about Tony and his upbringing. "Here we are." Tony stopped the car and got out quickly to open Liz's door and help her with the crutches. Liz had never been to this place before. It was an historic homestead just outside of Elizabethtown, which had been converted to a fine dining restaurant and B&B. "It's such a beautiful place." Liz balanced on her crutches and looked up at the mansion. "It was built in the early 1800s. One of my colleagues had his wedding here last year. That's how I found this place. The food is great." Liz was so proficient on her crutches, she even made it up the 3 stairs to the doorway of the restaurant. At the back of the restaurant, Liz could see an open fire blazing within a large, ornate, white, fancy mantelpiece. All the tables had crisp white tablecloths, and a large white candle was burning on each table. The lights from the candles gave the room a soft, warm glow. The restaurant was, Liz estimated, around 2/3 full of people. Tony had booked a secluded table near a wall, so they would have somewhere to put the crutches where no one would trip over them. "It's so pretty in here." Liz's eyes were drawn to the small flower arrangement on the table with the long, solitary white candle in the center. "Not as pretty as what I'm looking at right now," he replied. Liz looked at Tony and laughed. "That's a little corny, Tony." Tony smiled. "It is corny, but true." he said as he gave her a wink. A waiter brought them some menus. Salads were Liz's favorite, and she normally had a Caesar salad when she went to restaurants, but thought she would have a look at what were in the other salads. The next salad on the menu listed the ingredients as fresh baby spinach, dressed with raspberry vinaigrette and topped with Parmesan cheese, pecans, and blueberries. Blueberries reminded Liz of the special time when Ephraim found blueberries for her. That day they wandered through the fields. Tony's words cut straight through her thoughts. "What looks good to you?" he asked. "Everything looks good. What about you?" she replied. "I think I will have the Atlantic salmon with caviar," he said. Liz had never tasted caviar before. She knew they were fish eggs, and she did not care for seafood at all. "I think the marinated steak looks good." Tony closed his menu. "Excellent choice," he replied. The waiter took their orders and brought them a bottle of white wine. "Tell me something about yourself, Liz." Tony leaned forward and poured her a little wine. "You know quite a bit about me already. What else would you like to know?" Liz took a sip of wine. She cautioned herself not to drink too much as she wanted to keep a level head. "I'm pretty good at reading people. I'll tell you about yourself and you tell me if I'm right," he said. Liz raised her eyebrows. "Okay." Tony leaned back in his chair. "I'd say you had a pretty bad disappointment in your life when you were younger. That caused you to leave your parents and the Amish. You have no real friends except for Sarah, and maybe her sisters. You keep to yourself and don't let people get close to you. You question your relationship to God. How am I doing so far?" Liz moved uneasily in her seat. "I didn't know I was that easy to read. Also, you have a crush on that Ephraim fellow, yet you can't commit yourself to him because you fear getting entangled in the Amish community." Liz felt heat immediately rise to her cheeks. "I don't have a crush on Ephraim." She could not stand to have someone guess that much about her. "That was pretty good except the part about Ephraim." Liz took another small sip of white wine. "Now my turn." Tony leaned back and folded his arms in front of his chest. "This will be good. You left the Mennonite community because you wanted to help people, and the only way you saw you could do that was by becoming a doctor." "I told you that already. That's cheating," he replied. "I haven't finished. Your parents don't talk to you because you upset them by leaving, and they think if they don't talk to you, then you might come back to the community. You have no friends apart from people who work at the hospital. You have no hobbies or interests other than your job. Your apartment's predominant color is gray, and it is only partially furnished because you hate going shopping. You rarely cook because you eat out all the time or get takeout. You only own one saucepan and one fry pan." Tony clapped his hands slowly. That was pretty close. "Wait, I haven't finished. Your plates and saucers are all white because you figure that when you break a piece, it will be easier to replace." "That's true. I have white plates. True about the apartment, it is gray and I don't have a lot of furniture." "How did you know that?" he asked. Liz laughed. "I just guessed, that's all." Liz did not care whether his apartment was gray or what color his plates were. She was just pleased that she was able to divert Tony's attention from the subject of Ephraim. Chapter 15. "Thou art my hiding place. Thou shalt preserve me from trouble. Thou shalt compass me about with songs of deliverance." Selah. Psalm 32:7. Tony walked Liz to the front door of Sarah and John's house. He leaned in to kiss her goodnight, and Liz turned slightly so the kiss landed on her cheek. Liz considered it a very awkward moment. It was obvious that he wanted to kiss her on the lips. As soon as Liz walked through the door, Sarah met her. "Well, how did it go?" "Sarah, what are you doing awake?" Liz asked. Liz glanced through the long, narrow window next to the door to make sure Tony had driven away before she said anything further. "I wasn't waiting for you." Sarah laughed. "I just had to get up and feed Miriam. I've just put her back to bed now. So how was it?" "It went fine." Liz sat on the couch and put the crutches on the floor next to her. "It was nice. We went to an old B&B, which had a really nice restaurant, and we had a nice meal together." Sarah sat down opposite her. "Was it romantic? You're using the word nice again a lot." "Not sure if I would say that it was romantic. I had a good time, but it felt more like friends, like I was having dinner with an old friend." Sarah looked disappointed. Oh, I was hoping that you might like him a little better than that. Looks like he'd be a good catch. Liz laughed. Where did you pick up that expression, good catch? I'm not out there fishing for a husband, you know. Maybe, Liz thought. That's exactly what I am doing. I didn't deliberately look for Tony, but I am looking coldly at him, sizing him up for his suitability as a husband. I don't know where I picked it up, Sarah laughed. I'd just like to see you happy with someone, that's all. Thanks, Sarah, I know what you mean. It would be nice to be happy with someone. As usual, Liz's thoughts turned to Ephraim, and she wondered what he would be doing right now. She looked at the time, 15 minutes past midnight. She had no idea it was quite that late. Ephraim would most definitely be asleep by now because he was such an early riser. Can I get you some tea or anything before you go to bed? Liz patted her full tummy. No, I'm fine. I couldn't fit anything more in even if I tried. I'm sure I ate enough for the rest of the week. Good night, then. Sarah leaned over and kissed Liz on the forehead. Night. Liz made her way to bed. It was very hard for Liz to get in and out of clothing, so instead of her usual jeans, she had found it easier to wear dresses. I wonder how her date went with Dr. Perfect, Ephraim wondered. John, Sarah's husband, who was also Ephraim's cousin, had told Ephraim that Liz was going on a date with Tony, the doctor from the hospital. The thought of Liz going on a date with someone else made Ephraim very upset. He was sure that Liz returned his love. Why is she going out with this doctor? The only thing that made sense to Ephraim was that Liz had made the decision that she would definitely not return to the community. I think she loves me, but she doesn't love me enough to return to the community. She may not love me that much, but I have enough love for both of us. I will have her as my wife one way or another. That is one thing that I know. No other woman has ever made me feel the way that Liz makes me feel. I've never known love of a woman before. I will not let it escape from me. Although the date had gone very well and she had a good time with Tony, all Liz could think about was Ephraim. Tony was a very nice man and would make a good husband, but he did not make Liz feel safe and protected the way Ephraim made her feel. With Ephraim, it was like there was a magnet within him, which pulled her toward him. Liz wondered if the feelings for Ephraim would disappear in time, or whether she would be plagued by thoughts of Ephraim for the rest of her life. Is it true that he has changed? I hope so, but I guess it doesn't matter because he will never leave the Amish. Liz went to sleep remembering the time that he held her hand in his at the hospital. His hand was strong, large, and warm. He made her feel safe. Days later. I'm well enough to make it up the stairs tomorrow. I don't think I can drive for a while, though. Liz sat down on one of the kitchen stools and watched Sarah feed Miriam. Do you want John to drive you home, then? That would be great, thanks. I've arranged for someone at work to drive me to and from work, too. Sarah put another mouthful of food in Miriam's mouth, successfully avoiding Miriam's chubby hands that were trying to grab hold of the spoon. So have you got clearance from your doctor? Yes, I have. Liz had been to the hospital that morning, but her doctor was nowhere to be seen. Another doctor who was on duty that day tended to her leg. Has he asked you out again? Sarah seemed to be losing the battle for the spoon. Miriam had successfully taken hold of the spoon and was now having a game of tug-of-war with her mother. Liz was uncomfortable talking about the doctor because she did not even know how she felt about him. It was hard to put her feelings into words that would make sense to another person. No. It just feels a little awkward with him now. I mean, where do we go from here? What do you mean? Liz shrugged her shoulders. We had a really good time, and then he wanted to kiss me goodbye. I think he wanted to give me some big passionate kiss or something, and I turned my head and gave him my cheek. Sarah laughed. Well, it was the first date. Do you think that's what caused the awkwardness? Maybe he senses that you like Ephraim more than him? Sarah. Sarah gave up her quest for the spoon, letting Miriam play with it for a while. That's what I thought. Look at you. You turn into a mess every time his name is mentioned. Liz picked up a tissue from the counter next to her and wiped off a spatter of baby food from Sarah's face. It just wouldn't work out between Ephraim and me. Who are you trying to convince, me or you? Sarah frowned at Liz. Liz stood up and said, I've got to call work. Sarah called after her. You can't run away from love. It will get you in the end. The very next day, John, Sarah's husband, drove Liz home to her apartment and made sure she was capable of getting up the stairs. She had missed her modern, light-filled apartment so much. Somehow being alone in her apartment with no one to consider but herself did not feel like the freedom that she had expected it to. A sense of loneliness filled her being. It was not a loneliness of being without people around. It was a loneliness born from the fact that Ephraim was not with her. Liz did her best to drown out her constant thoughts of Ephraim. The hospital had told her she could have a bath if she kept her leg up and covered it with plastic. The idea of a hot bubble bath made Liz smile. I haven't been able to have a bath for so long. Liz bound her leg with plastic wrap and carefully lowered herself into the hot bubbles. She hoped she would be able to get out of the bath just as easily as she had got in it. The bubbles were scented with lavender, which reminded Liz of the way Ephraim had smelled when he gathered her up in his arms when she had hurt her leg. She breathed in the fumes of the lavender and pretended to be in Ephraim's strong, protective arms once more. What if I've lost Ephraim forever and he's courting Ruth? Now he thinks that I don't care for him. The thought of Ephraim with another woman was a thought that Liz could not bear. All Amish men get married sooner or later. He may seriously look for a wife now. As the heat of the bath caused the lavender fumes to waft over Liz, she seriously considered what it might be like to return to the community. Was it the hot fumes that caused her to think outrageous thoughts? Or was it the love of a man that she did not want to lose? What am I doing with my life, God? Liz suddenly realized that she had been living a futile life since she had left the Amish. She craved the security and the sense of belonging that Ephraim and her friends had. It was as if the heavens had opened and shone a bright light upon her as she decided she would return to the Amish. I need to get baptized and make peace with my parents. Thank you, God, for watching over me all these years and guiding me back to you. Liz considered that there was only one thing to do, and that was get out of the bath, get dressed, and get a taxi to Ephraim's house right now. She hoped she would not be too late. Chapter 16. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Hebrews 4:16. Although her leg hurt going down the stairs and getting into the taxi, it wasn't nearly as hard as getting out of that hot bubble bath. Liz felt a huge knot rise in her stomach. She did not want to look like a crazy woman turning up unexpected at his house. But on the other hand, she was the one who had rejected him and she had to put things right. Liz glanced at her watch and saw that it was 6:30 p.m. and suspected that she was going to arrive in the middle of dinner. She only hoped that Ephraim was going to be home. As the taxi pulled away from Ephraim's house, leaving Liz standing outside, Ephraim strode towards Liz from the direction of the barn. Liz, what are you doing here? How's your leg? He pushed his strong hand through his dark hair as he stood in front of her. How could she have forgotten how handsome he was in such a short space of time? How would she speak to him? How was she going to tell him after days had passed that she liked him too, without sounding like a crazy woman? Before Liz could speak, Ephraim's mother bustled through the front door of the house and yelled from the porch. Liz, how lovely to see you. Hello, Mrs. Zook. Liz was surprised that Ephraim's mother sounded genuinely pleased to see her. Have you come for dinner? His mother asked. Yes, she has, Ephraim said before Liz had a chance to respond. Excellent. It's about 10 minutes away. Ephraim's mother disappeared back inside the house. Liz wondered if Mrs. Zook's attitude would change toward her during dinner. I hadn't intended to stay for dinner, Ephraim. I just wanted to speak to you in private. Liz figured that if things did not go as she hoped they would, she could leave. However, if she had to sit through dinner after finding out Ephraim was not interested in her in the way that she wished, that would be very awkward indeed. How's your leg, Liz? Much better, thank you, she said. I'm back in my apartment now. Yes, I'd heard you were staying with John and Sarah for a while, he replied. Liz was pleased that he had found out that she had not stayed at the doctor's place after all. Ephraim walked toward the house and gestured for Liz to walk with him. What do you want to speak to me about? He asked. Can we speak after dinner? Liz thought it best to wait to speak to him after dinner. During dinner, she could plan exactly what she would say to him. You sit here, Liz. Mrs. Zook seemed to have changed from the last time Liz had visited the farm. Last time she was making little snide remarks towards her. This time even the expression of her face was much more pleasant. Oh, it smells lovely. Roast chicken? Liz asked. Yes, roast chicken and roast vegetables. Ephraim's mother put the plates of food on the table, and more food was placed in the center of the table for people to help themselves. This was the first time Liz had been inside their huge house. It would have to be huge to contain 7 children, and they even had Ephraim's grandparents living here too at one stage, Liz thought. As Mrs. Zook sat down, she turned to Liz. "So what did you do to your leg?" "Let me explain." Ephraim laughed. "It was entirely my fault. I had her lead one of my horses out at the auction. It reared up and knocked Liz over and broke her leg." Ephraim's sisters all giggled. Mrs. Zook looked from Ephraim to Liz. "Sorry to hear that. So you went to an auction with Ephraim?" Liz took a deep breath. Of course she wouldn't be happy with an Englisher like me spending time with her precious son. "Yes, I did. He invited me." She thought she would put the blame on Ephraim. Ephraim's mother looked at her son and popped a forkful of chicken into her mouth and remained silent. Mr. Zook had also been very quiet. He looked like an older version of Ephraim. He was still well built even though he looked to be in his mid-60s. His hair was still dark in places but mostly silver. Liz considered that if Mr. Zook's personality was a representation of his face, then he was a most kindly man. "Are you a good cook, Liz?" Liz looked across at Mr. Zook's kindly face. "People say that I am, unless they are just being polite." Mr. Zook gave a little chuckle. "I'm sure you are a good cook." "I'm not as good as you, Mrs. Zook. This chicken tastes delicious." Liz hoped that flattery would win Mrs. Zook over. "Thank you, but it was the girls who cooked this. I just showed them what to do." Liz looked at the 3 girls who had their heads down from the time they had sat at the table. They had barely made eye contact with her. "Good job, girls," Liz said. The oldest girl looked up and nodded by way of saying thank you. Liz was sure that they had been told they must not speak during dinner. "Don't speak unless you are spoken to." Liz remembered the words her parents used to say to her before they had guests for dinner. After dinner, Ephraim whisked Liz away to the porch. "I'm pleased that you came here," he said. They both sat on large wooden chairs, even though the weather was almost too cold to consider sitting outside. "Wait here." Ephraim went inside and came back with a thick black coat and draped it around Liz's shoulders. Liz cuddled into his coat. "Thanks. That's so warm." Liz bit her lip and began to speak. "I told you at the hospital that things wouldn't work between us." Ephraim interrupted. "Now you realize that you were wrong?" he asked. Liz smiled back at him and nodded. "It wasn't what I felt for you I was thinking of. I never wanted to come back to the Amish. It was never about you." "Before you say too much, Liz, let me go first." He moved uncomfortably in his seat. "You said there was too much against us, and I think that there is," he told her. Suddenly, Liz's heart felt like it was breaking into tiny pieces. Her first instinct was to run away and hide. A tear trickled down her face. She turned her head away from Ephraim slightly, hoping that he would not see her tears. Ephraim continued, "I would consider leaving the community for you. Let me say that again, I have considered leaving the community for you. Then it led me to think of what our life would be outside the community," he said. Liz interrupted. "What if I come back?" Ephraim raised his eyebrows and leaned back slightly. "You would come back for me." She wanted to tell him that he was continually on her mind and that she only felt happy when she was with him. But all she could do was nod her head and hope that she had not left things too late. "Wow, that was something that I didn't expect. How can you live away from the English lifestyle now, though, when you've been out of the Amish for so long?" "I've had a lot of time to think while I've been in hospital. Fancy clothes and makeup were not important when I couldn't move out of the hospital bed. Friends and family are what's important." Liz knew that Ephraim's mother would probably never truly like her or accept her, but she decided she could live with that. Chapter 17. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Psalm 46, 1-2. "Liz, I haven't been entirely honest with you," he said. Liz drew in a deep breath. Here it comes, she thought. I knew that this was too good to be true. She quickly brought to mind all the stories and rumors she'd heard about him in the past. Has he already moved forward with courting Ruth? "I'm sick, Liz," he told her. Liz studied his face, trying to work out what he just said, as it did not make sense to her. Sick? Do you want me to take you to the doctor? No, Liz. I mean terminally sick. I was never meant to live this long. The doctors thought I would never even grow up to be an adult. Liz could not believe what she was hearing. This was the last thing that she had expected him to say. It all did not seem real. You can't be sick, Ephraim. You look so strong and healthy. Maybe that explains his mother's strange ways. She's protective and fears to lose him, Liz thought. Ephraim held Liz's hand tightly. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before, Liz. I suppose I never thought I'd be lucky enough for you to fall in love with me. I'm sorry. Liz was sorry for the both of them and wondered how much longer she would have with him. Nothing else mattered now. Liz regretted having stayed away from him for so long. She suddenly saw herself as she really was, truly selfish. She had been so protective of her own feelings that she nearly never told the only man she ever loved how she felt about him. Ephraim patted her hand. That's not all I want to talk to you about. I've done some things in the past that I'm not proud of, he told her. Liz nodded. She could see why he would act out and do some weird things if he thought he would die at any time. Liz thought of all the mean things Ephraim had done to the people close to her. You don't have to tell me anything. I do, Liz. I do. I think I was testing God to see if he was really there. As time passed, I saw that God was with me and I repented and got baptized. He squeezed Liz's hand a little. I can't promise you any sort of future, Liz. I can't even father children because of the type of chemotherapy that they gave me. That's awful, Ephraim. I never would have guessed. Liz thought of the prospect of never having any children. She had never really had the maternal instincts that she saw in her friends. Besides, she was sure the Miller girls would have lots of children she could help look after. I never even knew you were sick. Mom never told anyone. She didn't want anyone to treat me different or feel sorry for me. Being a midwife, it was easy for her to be seen to go to the hospital often and have me go with her. She told people she took me to the hospital so there was one less children for Grandma to look after. It was then that I would have the treatments, he said. You've been so well for so long, maybe you're cured. Tears fell down Liz's face. She had finally let go and learned to trust God, and now it looked like he could take Ephraim from her at any time. She wondered if God was punishing her. Maybe, I don't know. The doctors don't know about the rare form of leukemia I have, so they can't tell me anything. They're surprised I've lived this long, he told her. Liz's cries turned into large sobs. Please don't cry, Liz. How can I not cry? I'm angry with God. It's just not fair. I just start to trust him, and then he does this to me. Why is he punishing me? As soon as the words left her mouth, Liz felt ashamed. She was only thinking of herself again. No, don't be angry with God. He brought us together. We should thank him. You make me happy, very happy, he told her. Liz looked up to the sky and looked at the moon through bleary eyes. Liz, I can't give you my word that we will even have 1 full year together. Then again, we could have 5 or even 40. I can give you my word that I will always love you and look after you for as long as I live, he said. I love you too, Ephraim. There she had said it, and she felt free for saying it. She had longed to tell him that she loved him, but she thought they had too much against them, even before she had learned of his illness. I want to make the most of our time together, and the only way we can do that is if we get married. I want you with me all the time. Will you marry me, Liz? Liz thought of having to look after Ephraim if he became very ill. She thought about living as an Amish woman for the rest of her life. Then she thought of living without this man for the rest of her days. Yes, Ephraim. Oh yes, of course I will. The only thing that mattered to Liz was spending every day with Ephraim. She no longer cared if she broke a fingernail. She no longer cared about fashionable English clothes. The only thing in the world that mattered to Liz was her renewed trust and love for God and her love for Ephraim. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Psalm 46, 1, 2. You have been listening to Ephraim's Chance, written by Samantha Price, narrated by Susanna Coleman. Copyright 2014 by Samantha Price. Production copyright 2023 by Samantha Price.